Hello, good morning, and welcome to Newsfile. This is your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, as you know, we put Ghana first. The Auditor General reveals to us rot and theft, sheer rot. He says there are cash irregularities amounting to 1.8 billion Ghana cedis, payroll irregularities amounting to 9.6 million Ghana cedis, procurement irregularities 846.1, it's almost a billion there, tax irregularities 29.2 million, stores irregularities 11.5 million, contracts irregularities 89.9 million. Question: so what next? Is that the end of it? Well, the Auditor General has not issued disallowances. He has not issued surcharges like your typical Domelevo would have done on the basis of the power handed the service or the Auditor General by the Supreme Court in the Occupy Ghana versus Attorney General case. So how will these monies be recovered? Will they be recovered at all? Will anybody face prosecution for these? And why not? Meanwhile, President Akufo-Addo praises him as having shown some example and doing some good work. The president says he's steadfast in his fight against corruption, but he's unhappy with some of the CSOs because they are involving partisan politics. And they sought to thwart his second chance at being president. He's not happy about them. We examine the evidence of the president's proclaimed commitment to the corruption fight. Now, the IAA has indicted the GNPC over how it has conducted itself in signing international contracts, not one, not two, without recourse to the necessary approval. We ask the question, but how bad is the $1.65 billion Aker Energy deal? Bright Simmons will deal with that for you. We'll be right back to deal with the vex matters. Welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and it is brought to you by Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Son, seeing is believing. Waylead, home is where one starts from. Star Assurance, your solid partner. Duraplast, where Duraplast goes, water flows. DBS Industries. MG Auto Trading, official distributors of MG vehicles in Ghana. I know you have expectations that you'll be hearing first my take. I have no take. I come here this morning to celebrate my editor, Said Ali Yaqub, who passed on a year ago under very trying circumstances. And at Love FM in Kumasi, the newsroom has been named after him, Said Ali Yaqub Newsroom, Say Newsroom. We wish him well and his family particularly his 2 daughters, very wonderful daughters. And that brings me to a question about, I'm hearing that some boards that are being constituted don't have a single woman on them. I hope that is not true, because that would be such a sin against even the Constitution. In fact, in the directive principles of state policy, that would be such a sin, and against women as well. Of course, I know you'll ask that I do my show often and there are no women on my platform. Yes, I wish that sometimes that sort of energy would direct it rather at the state where we pay our taxes and expect them to do the right things. Thankfully, this morning, we are joined by distinguished panelists who will do more than justice to the issues that we have to discuss this morning. So, let me welcome my guests for this morning. You are also to join us by your messages on all our social media platforms. Let us know what you think about portions of the Auditor General's report that you have been reading. Let us know what you think about the President's proclamation that he is committed to the fight against corruption and that his commitment is steadfast. Let's know about that as well. You have followed the GNPC Aker Energy deal and perhaps may have read what Professor Ebo Hinson wrote and what Bright Simmons replied him. You may also share your views on those. Thank you very much. My guest this morning, Bright Simmons, is Honorary Vice President, Imani Africa. Thank you for making the time to join us via Zoom, Bright. Okay. Here in the studio is Oliver Baka Vomawo. He is researcher, University of Cambridge, Faculty of Law. Good morning and welcome to Newsfile.
Thank you.
Right. So, first time I'm seeing you face to face in this studio. We are speaking to you all the time via Zoom. Thank you so very much. You bring such, richness to the discussions that we have. Iconoclastic views, and our audiences are excited about them. I'm not just, seeking to flatter you.
Please do flatter me.
Right. Dr. Eric Odro Osai, you have missed him on this show. He's Director General, Internal Audit Agency. That is IAA. You heard me mention earlier that they have indicted the GNPC for its conduct in securing international deals or contracts without the necessary approvals. Doc, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And Doc has such a rich background that will assist us in discussing the audit report this morning. I'm tired of reading that report. I am sick in the stomach reading that report because at the end of the day, I tell myself that what I see in that report is enough to get us to stop running to people cup in hand. And we do it every year. The report comes and it shows the sleaze, the graft, and yet it appears nobody suffers for them. Beauty Emefa Nate is Executive Secretary, Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. She's joining us via phone. So thank you all so very much for making time this morning. Let's begin by briefly listening to the President, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, when he held that meeting with the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition.
The highly politicized atmosphere in which many of these allegations are raised in Ghana, in which some of the civil society organizations are privy to and complicit in, where it's the line between them being independent commentary and being politically related commentary is very, very thin. And in many, many cases, there are lines that are in fact crossed. There are civil society organizations that mounted campaigns to make sure that I did not continue to sit in this seat. I cannot overlook that when I hear them continuing to attack my government and its works, that these were not people who were in any way either objective or sympathetic to what I was doing. So if I tend not to pay too much attention to what they say, I don't know. For myself, I think that a lot of objective people would appreciate the point of the position that I take. I think we're all aware of the circumstances in which the first Auditor, when I say the first Auditor General in my time, left office. It seemed to presage some disputation between him and my government, between him and myself, and somebody had to act in his place. I felt that it was important that that person should be given sufficient time to develop the confidence of the population, rather than to rush to an appointment which could also have given the impression that that is the reason why we acted against the first Auditor General, to remove him from office and plant somebody perhaps more pliant or more accessible. I believe the one who has succeeded him, who came to succeed him by natural order in the hierarchy there, has not demonstrated sufficient quality, independence of view. For instance, he's responsible for something that is unheard of in our history, the 12 statutory reports that have to be compiled and placed before Parliament.
Described it as
a personal price to pay for corruption by speeding up the investigation and prosecution of corruption cases, as well as asset recovery of proceeds of corruption. However, we will have to be more radical in our efforts to achieve results in the short term if Ghana is to deliver a big blow against corruption. As demonstrated by the 2019 Afrobarometer Corruption Survey, public approval ratings of government's efforts at fighting corruption have waned. Therefore, Mr. President, you and your appointees must prioritize measures that will contribute to a restoration of public confidence in the commitment and dedication of you and your team's effort to fight corruption. One way to demonstrate this is to lead by example and refrain from profligacy while applying sanctions to appointees who fall foul of the law.
Right. So the anti-corruption, campaigners met with the president, and their message is, in summary, what you heard the representative read, that the corruption perception surveys over the period, it doesn't look good, and therefore they called on the president to do something about it and get his appointees also to set up. And you heard some portion of the president's response. Let's first hear from Beauty Emefa Nate, who is the Executive Secretary of the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, madam. Kindly unmute your microphone. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Good to have you. Why was this necessary in the first place?
Okay, thank you so much, Samson. I'd like to first greet your audience and thank you for the opportunity that you have given us. Our motivation to meet with the president stemmed from our concerns, evidence from our work on the ground, because we believe that the fight against corruption should be a concern to every Ghanaian. And looking at the data, we realized that there is the need to draw the president's attention so that the necessary measures will be urgently taken. So the forum that the president provided was a forum for a candid dialogue, especially given the creeping normalization of corruption that becomes a threat to our development aspirations, especially the president's agenda of moving Ghana beyond aid. So that was why we met with the president to reflect the data that is not speaking so well about the state of Ghana's fight against corruption, and also elicit his support in terms of addressing them.
So yeah, we have read your report. I think the Afrobarometer report the last time. Give credence to what you just said, the creeping normalization of corruption, where a majority of the people were aware of the corruption and yet suggested that they were scared to even report or speak about it because they will suffer some reprisal. Whilst corruption was heavy, it wasn't their topmost priority issue that they needed resolved. And so you came to the conclusion, as in the anti-corruption body, that there was a dangerous creeping normalization of corruption. So you tell him about it, and so what?
Okay, so before the and so what question, just to highlight some of the concerns that we raised. So we looked at the Corruption Perception Index, which is churned out by Transparency International every year. So we look at the 10 years data. And something, the unfortunate issue is that we have never been able to score above the average mark for this 10 years. And the other unfortunate issue is that our highest score within this 10 years has been in 2014, which was 48. And the lowest score we had was in 2017, which is 40. So if you have the graph and look at 2012 to 2020, what it means is that we have not been able to even sustain the earlier gains we made. And so the picture presents a stagnation in our fight against corruption. That notwithstanding, you talked about the Afrobarometer. The Afrobarometer results or survey is also indicating that the citizens' approval ratings for government's anti-corruption efforts declined sharply since 2017, which is where we had our lowest corruption perception survey. And unfortunately, before 2017, citizens had a lot of hope for the president to be able to tackle corruption. So if there's that sharp decline, one, we believe that is something that needs urgent attention. And then why, in response to your and so what question, has to do with the fact that the president, if you recall, when he went for the bar conference or so, talked about the kind of investment he has made in the resources allocation. And he even repeated same when we met with him in terms of the investment that he's doing in terms of supporting the fight against corruption. Our worry is that if we are actually putting in a lot of resources and the data we have is not consistent with the resources being pushed into the fight against corruption, then every Ghanaian should be worried. And that is why we feel that questions should be asked. Are the resources being used to effectively support the work that should be done? Are the resources, even the strategy for the resources that we are they in consonance with, for instance, the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan, which is the Ghana's 10-year anti-corruption strategy we adopted in 2014. So if the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan we agreed on a holistic approach to the fight against corruption, if we are effectively supporting that with resources, are we implementing it as the NACAP suggested? And if not, why? And if yes, why are we not getting the needed results? So these are questions that we believe need every Ghanaian to be interested in, and also for the president to ask and reflect on, so that we can, if it is a matter of reflection, it will help us to identify the shortcomings and re-strategize so we can have the benefits of the resources being invested.
I'll return to ask what your answer to these questions, more importantly, the question about the resources, there not being a certain commensurate reflection of what the resources that are being said to be pumped into these organizations, is able to produce. But briefly, how did you take the president's response? What he told you was that his commitment is steadfast, even though he has issues with some of the entities also because they are partisan, and feels that CSOs were not happy to see him come back to office.
Okay.
As in win elections,
Yeah, so in regards to his response regarding his fight against corruption, he is also saying it from his perspective, but we also believe that he will reflect on the data that we handed to him, and we believe that he would look at the issue critically. And because, why am I saying this? The president has encouraged that we should have more of this discussion, where we could then look at the issues. So his response may just be a defensive response to the reaction of the data presented to him. But I believe that the president, in good faith, would look at the data, because I don't think the president would want to waste the nation's resources. So he would want to look at the data. And with regards to the issue, so even the data, let me just draw attention to another data that we presented to him, which is the Auditor General's report. And if you look at the irregularities presented and the amount of money that has been listed as part of the irregularities, especially for the previous years, compared to 2020, the amount has more than doubled. So that is worrying, because if you previously had about 6 million, and now the current report is talking about 12 million, if I got it right, let's say 12 billion, sorry, I think 12 billion. Then you should be worried that if this report it means that there's some increase, a high jump from the previous audit reports results. So that is why we believe that the president will necessarily has to do something about this. In relation to the attack on CSOs, something I would like to say that this is not so new from my experience. CSOs over the years have always been branded by government. Perhaps this came because it came on the platform when the president was engaging directly with CSOs. But we've had governments always thinking CSOs are out to do do things that may not be in their favor. But interestingly, something, the data or the trend also shows that when these governments are in opposition, suddenly it's the same resources that CSO churn out that these same parties in opposition use for their political campaign or to seek political advantage in terms of the information that we churn out. So I don't think this is new, but I can confidently speak for the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition and our members and the partners we engage in, that any resource or information we put out there, it is holding government to account. And we can only hold government to account. We cannot, because government is managing the resources of the country. So the issues we raise has to do with budget, has to do with conflict of interest issue, has to do with how our resources are managed effectively and efficiently to the benefit of every citizen. And this information we always put out, which every Ghanaian can just go and look at the information. And we have been consistent in holding government to account. And I must say something that, interestingly, it's on record that the NDC has always accused CSOs of not being too harsh on them compared to the MPP government. So for me, it is good. It only shows that we are doing our work. It only shows that we are holding duty bearers to account for what they are entrusted with.
Right. Bright Simmons joins us. Thank you very much, Bright, for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Samson.
Great. So to start with, the issue of the danger of the creeping normalization of corruption, which brings the CSOs to decide that we need to sit down with the president. Perhaps he is not aware of what is going on, so that we can inform him to get him to reflect and to think what to do. Professor Jima Bwedi said not long ago, when Domelevo was removed from office, he said, quote, Mr. Domelevo was exercising proper constitutional and legal oversight over officials and institutions that Mr. Domelevo has sought to hold to account. The man was doing his best to protect the public purse. That's the mantra of the president. He came in to protect the public purse. There are many who say he's the biggest beneficiary of CSO's work, particularly in respect of corruption, CSOs and the media. Now, he says that the man was doing his best to protect the public purse, to claim surcharges for improperly spent public funds. One who is trying to fight corruption is one who is being persecuted and hounded out of office. Now, my interest is in the conclusion. He says, as for the president's credibility in terms of anti-corruption, I am afraid to say it is in tatters. It has been in tatters for a while, but this puts the nail in the coffin. I see Mr. Domelevo as a victim of well-orchestrated actions by individuals who are government officials and by state institutions. So, do you agree with Professor Jima Bwedi and therefore take the president's claim with a pinch of salt?
Well, I wouldn't frame my reaction in the same way that you have, but certainly, as far as the Afrobarometer results are concerned, the president ought to be worried if perceptions about corruption at the presidency has grown from 37% thereabout of Ghanaians believing that officials at the presidency are corrupt to as many as 78% of Ghanaians believing that officials at the presidency are corrupt over that period, from 2002 till the latest survey. So that certainly established the basis upon which CSOs will visit the president and seek to find out if he shares the concerns that CSOs have about this sudden or increasing spike in public discontent and public I say, distrust in the degree to which the president is fighting corruption. I have my own issues that the corruption matter is one that perhaps we will have to narrow down to specific sectors in order to be able to deal conclusively with it. And I guess I'll take your lead in that respect.
What do you make of his comments about CSOs? Some say, well, this is not new. In 2018, he launched an attack on the CSOs, and they have become familiar with a sitting president attacking CSOs.
Well, that's surprising, given the fact that the president's own party has been a very prolific user of CSO-type engagements with the political space in Ghana. I mean, Let My Vote Count, Alliance for Accountable Governance. The president's party is one of the well-known pioneers for setting up politically aligned think tanks like the Dankwa Institute. It dates back even before the transition into multi-party rule with the Young Elephants Club and a whole bunch of civil society type engagements. So if the president all of a sudden feels uncomfortable about the work of the CSOs, I'll presume that that is because in some instances, those activities are not aligned with his political interest. And it's natural to expect that a political actor will not be too happy if there are other actors that, are hell-bent on putting his government under strict scrutiny, some of which might have political costs. So we're not that surprised. We just don't believe that he's sincere in his concern about CSOs, given the history as I've just narrated it. We just think that it's understandable that if CSOs and others of that ilk are undertaking activities that perhaps could have significant political cost for the president's party, it's natural that we will expect him to fight back.
You just spoke about, or give us a list of some CSOs that are clearly established by political parties or political party or people who are politically exposed. And so is the president wrong when he says some of these CSOs are partisan? And I suppose we know that some of them are partisan. Some of them are just set up to do political propaganda.
That's the actual CSO activity. We always warn people to be very careful in the way that they characterize the civil society movement in Ghana. There are maybe 50,000 or so CSOs. The vast majority of them are community-based organizations focused on voluntary initiatives at the grassroots level, helping young people get a step on their foot on the ladder, the employment ladder. A bunch of them are involved in cooperative type economic activity. We have CSOs that are primarily hometown associations. There's a wide diversity of CSOs. Within that very broad spectrum, maybe 1% of them are politically active. And of the 1% that are politically active, the vast majority of them are still locally focused. So when it comes to nationally focused, politically active CSOs, we're talking about a very minute fraction of CSOs in this country. I'm not sure that when the president has concerns about CSOs, he has a concern about the 99% of CSOs that are generally community focused. He perhaps has concerns about CSOs that impact on the political landscape. And now the concern we have to have is that unless we're completely convinced that just because someone has been elected to represent specific interests, because it's a majoritarian process, and if you do a ranking, very often you are voting for someone because that's who is on the ballot, and in comparison with others on the ballot, this is the only one that perhaps is your least unfavorable candidate. So a lot of the time, we don't vote necessarily because the president we are voting for is completely representative of all our interests. Given that fact, the nature of the democratic game is such that you have a lot of suboptimal representation. A lot of people may not, believe that their MPs are sufficiently capable of representing all their interests. CSOs fill in that gap. So unless you are not a Democrat, unless you don't understand democratic participation, it will be very difficult with a straight face to hold that CSOs do not contribute remarkably, do not contribute extraordinarily to the progress of our democracy and to the quality of our democratic institutions. Which is why I say that the president was performing for an audience. His petition, they mount the platform, they perform, we things and condemn sometimes. And in that regard, we perhaps should not put too much store on what he says when, clearly he's performing for an audience.
All right. Well, we know the president relied heavily on Imani's work ahead of the elections, as in the election that brought him to power, and also work by Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition and the rest of them. Of course, we know the other so-called CSOs that only, come alive when a party is in opposition, when the party they associate with is in opposition. Now, Baka, he says that he will continue to listen to divergent views despite the efforts to thwart his re-election bid. What sense do you get from that?
I think that one of the things that happens very often is that when you have a president who has clearly declared an intention to say that, well, the vast majority of what CSOs are saying is calculated at elections and trying to get me unelected, then the framework of analyzing the problem and discussing it is on an electoral timetable. And that's one of the biggest questions I've had always in terms of how policy is decided and ways in which we think about problems. That every time we introduce the electoral cycle into the conversation, anytime anything is said and we fall back into, do I want to get elected or not get elected, we would definitely not be able to do justice to the problem. So that's one of the challenges here. But secondly, the president goes on to say, well, because all of them are this way, I have decided that I'm not going to listen to them. And that is very dangerous, where the president himself says on record that I have decided that I'm not going to even take anything out of substance of it, irrespective of the divergent voices. Because even those who are mobilized, and political as well, we say even a broken clock is right twice in a day. That there must be something that comes out of what you're saying that the president can engage with and find some benefit out of. It is the whole essence of why we're always talking about bipartisan approaches. Because we do find merit in the partisan back and forth, that there could something produce out of that. So that's where my bigger concern, I would say, is. But the president goes on and talks about, his own successes and all of that. And a lot of times I say, when we are being invited to analyze sort of a governance record on corruption, I wonder by what metric or benchmarks we want to be able to enter the conversation with. Because a lot of times it's very low on that substance. And what we do is that naturally we all defer then to anecdotal accounts, right? And the challenge with anecdotal accounts is that they are often dramatized single stories or single news items that we use as representative of the entirety of what the issues is. So for instance, in the Mahama administration, we would go quickly refer to Woyome, we would quickly refer to Bas Brandon, then Ford Saga, and that becomes seen as some totality of the failure on corruption. In this government, then we talk about Ijapa, we're talking about the Boss contamination scandal, we're talking about those instances then, while they do well in magnifying our perception of the problem, they do not give us the tools or the answers to be able to see the full range of the process and structure-driven corruption. So that's kind of where I want to take my attention to, in this conversation. Right. Now, for instance, the president has given us, in his conversation, 2 benchmarks by which we should assess his record on corruption. The first one relates to the creation of bureaucracies. So a lot has been made about the creation of the Office of the Special Prosecutor, which for some translates as some reflection or translation of a commitment to fight corruption. That's the first thing. The second one is about resourcing, and we have to engage with that a bit more. So let me start with the first one, which is about the creation of bureaucracies. If bureaucracies, or just the mere fact of the creation of a bureaucracy, is the winning the fight against corruption, then I think we are giving all politicians a pass. Because that is happening. I mean, the Mills administration created Yoko out of the Serious Fraud Office, and we can always go back and find instances where governments are quick to create bureaucracies, which then everybody's invited to appreciate and applaud, and then we never really get into the questions about, but what has that produced? And I think for the Special Prosecutor's Office in particular, we can all attest to the fact that, well, very little has come out of that so far. In terms of the resourcing, and there's a point that beauty MFNAT makes as well, and really puts the screws on that question. And I've taken a bit of time to listen to the president on this, because the president in his talking mentions specifically, Yoko, he mentions specifically, I think Shraj, he mentions the police, as some of the institutions which have been resourced in Parliament as well, as to help the fight in corruption. So I decided that, well, a lot of what we don't do often is, let's look at the numbers and see whether or not there is in fact that resourcing jump that the president is talking about. So I went back to the last thing the Mahama administration did, which was the 2015 Appropriations Act, which was supposed to prepare us for 2016. And in that, and I decided to not look at the Ghana cedi figures, but translate it into what the dollar rate at the time by the Bank of Ghana was as a benchmark, because I'm unable to account them for inflation and other things. So let's use the dollar value of the money that was given to Parliament under both administrations. So we know, for instance, that in the 2015 Appropriations Act, $67.5 million, based on the dollar rate at 31st December 2015, which is 3.7931, this Bank of Ghana dollar rates, was what was given to Parliament. Then in 2020, which is for 2021, 90.9 million was given to Parliament. So immediately you say, well, there's a 23.4 million increase that has been given to Parliament. But in fact, what we forget is one thing. One, the Parliament threatened to withhold the veto on the appropriations bill because it had been reduced by 20 million. So that money itself, Parliament had to fight for. And so there was no systematic program in saying that we're targeting corruption and we're going to do more, and that you need this resourcing to do that. Secondly, the bulk of that money goes to CAPEX, which is capital expenditure. So there's no direct increase in the budgetary allocations that are corruption specific. And so if we then say that, we can't extrapolate then from even the jump there and say there's an intentional attempt to centralize corruption as part of resourcing in Parliament. The president talks of Shraj. Now, in the 2016 or 2015 Appropriations Act, you have $8 million, again at the same Bank of Ghana raised then, given to Shraj. The president for 2020, based on the 5.753 of Bank of Ghana, you have again $8 million which is given to Shraj. No change has been given in terms of the receipts that Shraj gets. So I decided that, well, maybe the president is talking about something else that I'm not noticing. So I decided to go down to the breakdown, which is the budgetary allocation that are specific to corruption fighting under Shraj. Now, in 2016, we gave $551,000 for Shraj's anti-corruption work. And in 2021, we budgeted $566,721, which is $15,000 more. This is the significant resourcing we have been invited to engage in. Let's take Yoko. Again, one of the institutions that the president mentions. And the sector minister for Yoko is the Minister for Justice. And usually the budget for Yoko, I then find that is given to them under a heading called Management on Economic and Organized Crime to the Minister of Justice. And in 2015, for 2016, we gave $2.1 million based on the rates there. And now we've given them $3.4 million. So there's a $1.4 million difference. Again, the devil is in the detail. When you look at it, you see that the real changes are capital expenditure and money budgeted for procurement of goods and services. And when you go back to the source document, it's mostly new vehicles. So that's, again, we have been invited and told that the president is doing significant resourcing here. And I'm showing that I do not see this being accounted for in the numbers. For the police, now, under the current Appropriations Act, there's no specific indication of how much money was given to the police. But we know that under the former one, there's a breakdown for what is given to the police, which is under the 2016 one. But what we do know that all of them come under the Ministry of Interior budget. And the Ministry of Interior budget for 2020, 2021 is 6.5 million. The Minister of Interior budget for the 2016 was 8.3 million. So there's about 27% decrease, in fact, in allocations to the Minister of Interior. So it is very difficult for me then to see where the resourcing conversation is coming from. But beyond that, one of the things I'm very apprehensive about is tying ourselves with the shoestring that the president has provided, and then for which reason we fail to account for all the other things which we need to look at. But one of the bigger problems about the way in which the conversation around corruption is always talked about is that we are very focused on the input-based process rather than the output. So what are we putting in and what are we getting out of it? I mean, in terms of the resourcing, I've shown that we haven't done significantly different. But what has been different is that we've created a new bureaucracy, which is the Office of the Special Prosecutor, which, if you listen to the vetting of the new Special Prosecutor, you can tell that there's significant structural problems that already exist in the body of that institution. And I do wish him the best of luck. But even on that, and the resourcing for that, because it didn't exist under the Mahama administration, more money was given to it under the previous act than is being proposed for it this year round. So again, even on the input base, we're not getting it. And the output, we're not seeing anything really different. But fundamentally for me, one of the big gambles of our democracy, and in our democratic institution, is that the practice of democracy will create some sort of aversion to corruption and corrupt dealing. And that is why when you take all metrics by which corruption is accounted for, and you compare them against institutions or societies which are more democratic, you'd see that there's a direct correlation between the more democratic you are, the better you are doing on corruption. For Ghana, unfortunately, the inverse is true. That even though the metrics claim that we are doing better on democracy, corruption is getting worse. So which shows that perhaps corruption itself is endemic and related to the democratic process itself. So whether it's campaign financing, like the last election, you see people who on TV displaying amounts of money they have been giving, or bags of food, and all of that, we see that we don't do anything about. So the practice of democracy itself has made corruption endemic. And that is why it is not, unnatural to me to hear the CSO talk about creeping normalization. And I would say entrenchment itself of corruption, because it's directly related to our democratic processes.
Dr. Odrosai, you have been watching, normally you watch the figures to tell the story whether we are doing well or not in respect of how the audits are going. Well, in our Constitution, in Article 35, Clause 8, is an injunction on all, governments. It says the state shall is mandatory, shall take steps to eradicate corrupt practices and the abuse of power. When you take the president's response to what they told him and what they expect of him, how do you analyze his comments?
Thank you very much, Samson. And let me say good morning to your listeners and viewers. Samson, let me also help in the discussions, especially my brother has come out with a number of data. But let me also mention that IOCO, SHRAJ, and the police are not the only institutions fighting corruption in this country. We have the Internal Audit Agency, we have the Ghana Audit Service, we have the Financial Intelligence Center, all of them fighting corruption. Let me also mention that when budgets are allocated to institutions to fight corruption, they have to deliver on their mandate. And that is where I always fault people. If you want to look at only the figures without doing a performance audit on how the people deliver on their mandate or institutions deliver on their mandate, you get it wrong. Because he introduced the input-output analysis. If funds are given to deliver on a mandate, check whether the mandate has been delivered according to law. And that is where I would invite all Ghanaians to also look at the performance audit. Let me also make the statement that financing capital expenditure is a critical function or a critical component of the expenditure of anti-corruption institutions. Because if you don't have the vehicle, you cannot move. If you don't have the infrastructure, you cannot move. And we would all agree that the OSP, the previous special prosecutor, indicated that even the structure they gave to him was not good to enable him function. So financing CAPEX is key. So when my brother mentioned that majority of the funds that went to SHRAJ, for instance, went into CAPEX, and for that matter, he thinks that it is not directly related to fighting corruption, I would disagree with him. From where I sit, I think financing capital expenditure is critical for the work of the anti-corruption institution. Let me come to the substantive statement made by the president. I think that the president was being defensive. Once you attack a politician, you expect a politician to defend himself. But I see the fight against corruption in a number of ways. And since I became the Director General of Internal Audit Agency, I realized that we've gotten it wrong as a country. We always use the post approach to fight corruption instead of adopting a preventive approach. To fight corruption, you need laws, you need policies, you need institutions, and then you need the ability and the willingness to implement the laws and get these institutions to deliver on their mandate.
Which one of all these items don't we have?
We do not have the willingness to get the institutions to deliver on their mandate. And we have some group of indisciplined people who are managing state institutions who have made it their mind that they will not respect the laws of this country. And that is where I have the problem. We don't have a problem with laws. We don't have a problem with the structures. Our problem is how to implement the laws and get people to be on their feet. Cracking the whip is the challenge of the Republic of Ghana. Look at the Auditor General's report, and I will share some data. And I am not surprised about the report the Auditor General submitted about certain institutions, because at the internal audit level, the internal auditors have raised these issues time and again. We have written to them, we have engaged them, except that they've closed their eyes. And the challenge we have is that the internal auditors cannot act, because the Internal Audit Agency Act itself is obsolete and it ties the hands of internal auditors. So I think if we want to win the fight against corruption, and the president wants to make a lot of inroads by way of fighting corruption, we should adopt the preventive approach and crack the whip. Samson, let me come to the corruption perception data I have here. The corruption perception data, contrary to what I'm hearing, from 2017 to 2020, we have been improving. 2017 was 40, 2018 41, 2019 41, 2020 we moved to 43. I must admit that the highest all-time score was in 2014. We have never crossed 50, which is a problem for all of us. But to be able to resolve this issue, I think we should be more biting. And that is where my challenge is. The leaders of this country must crack the whip and be biting. The laws that are obsolete must be amended. Because if we are not very careful, we'll pump money into these institutions, we don't do performance audit, and we'll all be looking at the figures. We ask ourselves, what is the mandate of IOCO? What are they supposed to do? What have they done in the year towards fighting corruption? We have a National Anti-Corruption Action Plan. This action plan has been costed. It is being implemented on an annual basis. We need annual progress report. Who is aligning this to the monies or the funds that are injected into these activities? So I think that, look, we don't have a problem with laws. We don't have a problem with structures. We need to cultivate the habit and have the willingness to crack the whips and get people to do the right things. That's all.
The Afrobarometer survey that we referred to.
No, that's the Corruption Perception Index.
Corruption Perception Index.
Yes.
I'm talking about Afrobarometer,
oh, okay.
CDD champion.
The CDD Afrobarometer.
Spoke about, among other things, that corruption is somewhat a lot worse. And even though corruption ranked 8th, it was not a priority of the problems of Ghanaians. And this is where they came to the conclusion that we are getting to normalization of corruption, where people see the corruption, but they don't feel that bothered again. Do you think that feeds into the reactions that you get from public officers when the question of corruption is raised, particularly from politicians?
I think I want to agree with that perception, but it also boils down to, again, a leadership. If people think that corruption is normal in a country like Ghana, I can dip my hand in it, use the money to do anything, and nobody can do anything to me, then gradually we are institutionalizing it. And when we get to that level, then it means there's a failure of
this is 2019, just 2019.
Yes.
And the report said that 6 in 10 Ghanaians, that's 61% of Ghanaians, say that they will not report corruption for fear of some form of retaliation.
It means it's a failure of state institutions. Because if you have to blow the whistle, we have the Whistleblowers Act, and you have to blow the whistle, and you are double sure that if I blow the whistle, my identity will be covered, action will be taken. People will be motivated to blow their whistle. But if people have this perception and impression that even when I blow their whistle, they will blow my cover and no action will be taken. Nobody will report.
Does this fear come from the posture of the political leadership, or it does not?
I think it's does not, because the political leadership do not implement the law. You see, I think we have to separate political leadership from the technical administrative leaders who implement these laws. For instance, the Whistleblowers Act. The Whistleblowers Act is implemented by an institution. IOCO has an act. So assuming somebody reports a case to IOCO, IOCO investigates, and IOCO has the mandate to take them to court. Unless maybe the AG comes in with the nolle prosequi, the IOCO can proceed. So that is where maybe I agree with you on the political bit. But let IOCO take the steps and let all Ghanaians see that the political leadership has interfered or intervened and prevented IOCO from delivering on its mandate. Certain state institutions are just not delivering on their mandate. And I think those are the institutions we should put on their toes. The political leadership can be a problem. But in most cases, if you, the posture of the leader of that institution, is such that, look, it's a no-no. I can't imagine the Internal Audit Agency undertaking an investigation, having their report, send the report to IOCO to prosecute, and IOCO comes out to say that they will not. No, they have never done that to us.
I'm going to Beauty to give us her final, input, and then she takes leave of us as we move to the next issues. But I discovered that you were noting something when he was writing, when I asked the question about the posture of political leadership, whether it informs how people want to, act or not act. What's your view on that?
I find the sort of the limitation to the conversation as to why persons will be apprehensive to do more, to nolle prosequi, has been very limiting. And it's surprising to me because you talked about 6 out of 10 Ghanaians saying that they will not report. I've worked in the public sector. I think the number will be as high as 9 would not report because of fear of victimization. And the reason is simple. The few instances where we see somebody stick their neck out, their neck gets chopped. Daniel Domolevo talked about something, about the number of people who worked on that deal with him, where they were transferred, demoted, and others are handed out of office. That sends a clear signal as to what the civil service ought to conduct itself. That if this gives you an indication that this was what would happen, there's no way you do more than your perfunctory work and then walk home and don't get involved in anything. And it happens so many other instances where, for instance, you have talked about internal audit, where they may push this conversation, but there's a limit to how you go because you are fearful of what the reprisals would be.
We are not fearful.
Now,
we are constrained by our law.
Now the fear of reprisals that comes from the top down is translated from how politicians generally treat the civil service. For which reasons, even at the directorate level, they feel themselves as enforcers of what politicians' mind sensitivities downstream. Because they themselves are worried about what kind of blowbacks they're going to get. And so for which reason they send that messaging down. And as a young person who joins the civil service, your first reaction is walk away. You don't want to deal with this. And I think that is where this will become an entrenched way in which we won't get the institutions to push.
Now, BT, listening to the two of my guests in the studio, Dr. Eric Odrosai and Oliver Vomawo, what do you make of this fear, and as confirmed by the Afrobarometer Report 2019, that 6 in 10 Ghanaians will rather prefer, 61%, will rather prefer not to talk about it because they fear they'll get trouble. What do you make of that in the midst of we having a law? The Whistleblowers Act, both my guests here have just mentioned it. The Whistleblowers Act was passed in 2006. It is supposed to provide more than sufficient protection, including state security. And also, it is to provide protection against harassment. Becca mentioned victimization in the public service. It is to protect you against victimization. And in fact, for the generality of the public and anybody who blows the whistle, if you blow the whistle and it leads to a certain success, you are entitled to as much as 10% of the proceeds of the thing you blow the whistle on. This is such an incentive, and yet you have 61% of the people being scared and not wanting to do anything when they hear about corruption? What could be the problem leading to the normalization of corruption?
Thank you very much, Samson. So that still brings us back to the issue of the NACAP, which is the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan, where we adopted a holistic approach for fighting corruption. And we also looked at 3 strategies that we have to adopt, which is the prevention strategy that Dr. Oduro alluded to. We also admitted that it's important to also do education and sensitization so that citizens will know and also understand the effects and impacts of corruption on their lives. And the third strategy has to be with enforcement, which has to do with investigation and prosecution. But as you rightly said, and this data is even also confirmed by some research that the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition with partner organizations did regarding citizens' perception and their knowledge and experiences of fighting corruption, on corruption. And it doesn't speak well to the reality of our fight against corruption. Why am I saying that? Citizens continue to perceive corruption as something that is an entitlement. So when I'm gaining from it, it is good. When I'm not gaining from it, it is bad. And that is why issues of conflict of interest were not seen as corruption behavior when we did our study. Issues of nepotism have been accepted as something that Ghanaians, opportunities. So if I have a minister in power and I can get him to circumvent the due process to my advantage, then it is good. But all these are effects, or these actually lead us to corruption. Once we don't see anything wrong with conflict of interest, once we don't see anything wrong with nepotism, once we don't see anything wrong with issues that should draw our attention as citizens of corruption, then it means that we are normalizing it and we are accepting it as normal behavior. With regards to the witness whistleblower, we also have the witness protection law, which even has given additional support to whistleblowers. But something, the reality on the ground, the Ghana Anti-Corruption has invested a lot of energy on getting citizens to understand the whistleblowing. We even have produced simplified guides on the act so that citizens will have the basic understanding of the whistleblowing. And I would like to tell you that some of the issues we are confronted in the field. One, when the institutions that citizens have to even report to, these are the same institutions that some of the institutions that the Afrobarometer is saying that citizens do not trust. So, for instance, one of the closest institutions that citizens will report to will be the police. But when people go to the police station, from the data we have gathered, they are not even told, or they are not even given the option that we can report as a whistleblower. Because in reporting a complaint, you have to report under the whistleblowing or report as a normal complaint. So they end up reporting as normal complaint. And that is why then getting into the process, they realize that, no, that was not what their intention is. It's also because even the people who are receiving the complaints they do not even understand, or they do not have the appreciation of what the whistleblower is.
Or sometimes they have blown the cover of the blowers.
Exactly.
And
in fact,
they have put them in harm's way.
Exactly.
We are aware of that.
Thing I was even coming to. So secondly, people also told us that when they report, there's a compromise. So they are rather reported to the people that they reported, and the cover is blown. And for some time, from the field data that we have, citizens have felt more comfortable reporting to the media than to go to all these institutions, because they thought that once they put it out into the media space is better.
Right.
So that means that we need to have a lot to do to have citizens' appreciation of the effects of corruption.
Right.
If citizens do not see it, there is nothing we would do that would let them appreciate that corruption is a collective fight and each person has to play a role.
So back to that same important question I asked you. What is the place of political pronouncements to encouraging the citizens or discouraging them? In 30 seconds, if you can respond to that.
So the political pronouncements are not just words. They should be action. They should demonstrate action to say that when I talk about zero tolerance to corruption, this is exactly what I mean. And where political utterances do not seem to portray that if somebody has not, like, let me just use the current issue about the health minister, where the defense has been that because he has not personally benefited from the transaction, he is not corrupt. But clearly, the breaches have been documented. Procurement breaches have been documented. When you take the Financial Management Act, it has also been breached. So, and these are documented evidence of those breaches, which the minister himself has admitted to. So where lies the fact that if all these are breached and the presidency is saying that, oh, because of the COVID situation, because the minister has a good intention, so we must sympathize with him, then that becomes a miscommunicated issue to the citizen, because then citizens are having missed information. So when we say, no, you don't have to breach the procurement rules, you don't have to breach the financial management rules, and then somebody breach and we can sympathize in one context, and in another context we don't, then it confuses the citizen.
Okay.
And it also provides justification to also citizens to say that if this is done or accepted behavior in this particular context, then I could also justify my action in a particular context. So what we are saying is that we should not justify corruption in any way. Once rules are breached, we have to apply the sanction. And it's also important.
So this kind of conduct, you will say, is the reason we are not seeing the money as in reflect the actions. So there's no, the output doesn't reflect how much we say we are putting into these entities. Beauty, I want to thank you so very much for making time to join us this morning. Beauty Emefa Nate is with the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, and they had a meeting with the president, as you have understood from her, to let the president know of the circumstance of the fear and the danger of the normalization of corruption. And the president had his responses. So Beauty is the executive secretary of the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. I will get my last word, I suppose, from Bright Simmons, so that we take a break and return to continue with the other issues. Now, Bright, everybody is talking the law and all of that, but Beauty brings a certain face to the law and how it is applied. And we have heard Charlotte Osei say in this week that if you decide to discriminate how you apply the law, then you'll have a problem on your hands. We have the Whistleblowers Act. The law requires that there should be a fund set up to compensate people who blow the whistle. 15 years on, that fund has not been set up. Then in 2019, we add onto that law, Witness Protection Act. The protections that law, the 2006 law, is supposed to give to whistleblowers, already they don't get. Then we add onto that law. So where are we going?
I want to take an issue with the comment that Dr. Sai made about the fact that, it's not high-level political leadership that is amiss in this matter, and it's rather, heads of technical administrative agencies that we should focus our energies on. I think that's not correct. I mean, if tone at the top is not top-notch, not to stretch the metaphor, if tone at the top is not top-notch, you're going to have challenges trying to enforce discipline down the line. We've had situations where in the natural resource sector, for instance, Ghana has been a perennial underperformer. I mean, look at this issue around the timber legality assurance framework we've been trying to do for 10 years. Look at this issue around Galamsey. And you say, well, we've got administrative and technical agencies that are responsible, Mineral Commission and the rest. And yet still, when the political leadership needed to crack the whip and took matters into their own hand, we saw the minister responsible for the Interministerial Committee write to the CID suggesting that high-level political functionaries, leaders of the president's own political party, are implicated in a plot to take seized mining equipment and sell them in the open market or use them in the industry. And to date, there's not been an investigation of this gentleman that has led to any clear results, and the president is unable to step down on the matter and ensure that we get results. In those circumstances, how are you going to be able to ensure that somebody at the Minerals Commission does their work? In January of 2021, a multimedia investigation revealed that despite claims that soldiers were being withdrawn from Operation Vanguard, from Galamstop and the like, the truth is some of these soldiers were involved in providing protection. They were running protection rackets to the benefit of illegal miners in Manso Forest. That investigation had audiovisual evidence. To date, not a single senior officer of the Ghana Armed Forces has been held accountable for the actions of these soldiers and other members of the security forces who evidence widely suggests are implicated in illegal mining in this country. We've had situations where the Presidential Committee on Natural Resources has been caught on camera facilitating bribes, more or less within the premises of the presidency itself. No action has been taken that is conclusive enough to suggest that the president has a zero tolerance for corruption in these matters. So there's a long catalogue of situations in the natural resource sector and elsewhere where presidential action has not been forthcoming. And if action at the very highest echelons of the political authority are not forthcoming, it's very difficult then to hold actors below that level to the high standards that Dr. Sai believes we need to hold them to. You need to set the tone at the top.
All right. Thank you very much, Bright Simmons. We take a break here. When we return, we are going to the Auditor General and to Speaker of Parliament because he has transmitted his audit report to the Speaker of Parliament. We find out how we are going to recover in excess of 10 billion and so on. We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Evans Mensah, and you can relive all the fun and excitement on Top Story, Newsnight, and of course, Ghana Connect via podcast. All you need to do is to log on to my Joy Online/podcast. Search for your favorite show and relive the moment. Joy 99.7 FM, your radio for discerning listeners.
Joy 99.7.
You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. My guest, Bryce Simmons, Honorary Vice President, Imani Africa. In the very final segment today, and today we will be ending the show sometime by 12:20, 25 thereabout. Bryce Simmons, in the final segment, will take time and break down for us how bad, if it's really is this bad, the 1.65 billion Aker Energy, GNPC Aker Energy deal. Also here is Oliver Baka Vomawo. He's researcher at University of Cambridge, Faculty of Law. Dr. Eric Odrosai is Director General, Internal Audit Agency. Earlier we had Beauty Emefa Nate, who is the Executive Secretary, Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. And some of you may associate Oliver a lot more with what he calls the accidental convenership of the Fix the Country, of the Fix the Country. Now, before we proceed, let me just share just these few messages with you. A.B. Mentz says, the silence of our president and his unwillingness to fight corruption, even when the evidence is crystal clear, doesn't convince us as a nation that he's firm and loyal in fighting this menace. Kojo Amo Ansa says, if we are serious about fighting corruption in Ghana, then it should be treated as a treasonable offense. Until we do that, then we are joking. Collins Little Tete says, time and again, the need arises for a government to be reminded that its purpose is to serve people, not rule them. The corruption in government is obscene. K. Amofa says, if Whistleblower Act was passed in 2016 and in 2021, 60+% are afraid of reporting issues. Whistleblowers Act was passed in 2006. Are afraid of reporting issues. It means it's either a bad law or Ghanaians do not trust the people to report to. Perez Ewenam says, we have all the laws, structures, institutions, etc. to fight corruption. But the problem is the very people that should activate all the above to rigorously fight the canker are the very beneficiaries. It's kind of institutionalized. Heads of organizations must be in charge. Without strong, and this is coming from Sir Chris, without strong watchdog institutions, impunity becomes the very foundation upon which systems of corruption are built. And if impunity is not demolished, all efforts to bring an end to corruption will be in vain. CSOs have an essential role to play in this exercise. Why is corruption outcomes zero in Ghana, while anti-corruption institutions are on the increase? IOCO, Special Prosecutor, SHRAJ, Police, CID, etc. Are we not tired? Can we assess all these agencies and consolidate their mandate into one? Then Hamid Zak says, Auditor General report implicated so many heads of states, heads of state entities regarding contracts and procurement breaches, but it's business as usual. No one will be held accountable in these. Now, Doc, this is my concern. If you have the citizens having this kind of, perception that no one will be held accountable, it is going to be business as usual. It's clearly not good. GNPC awarding contracts without parliamentary approval, that's unacceptable. And the final one, Moshood Abdullahi says, the surest way of making corruption unattractive and a risky venture for anyone is by prosecuting people who are alleged to have been involved in bribery and corruption. Corruption is evil. It undermines democracy and, for that matter, the rule of law. Because of corruption, some village had money for a hospital. That hospital has not happened, and people are dying in that village. That's how to express how corruption works. Now, let's get to the Auditor General's report. And the Auditor General's report is scary. As I mentioned to you earlier, cash irregularities, 1.1 billion. Payroll irregularities, 9.6 million. Procurement irregularities, 846.1 million. tax irregularities, 29.2 million, stores irregularities, 11.5 million, contract irregularities, 89.8 million. And reading the Auditor General's report, he speaks about misapplication and misappropriation. The word he uses for misappropriation, he actually wanted to say stealing. All right. Now, we start with Dr. Odrosai. Going through the report, what are your comments?
Thank you very much, Samson. Samson, it's good to put on record that this report is the report of the public boards, corporations, and other statutory institutions. The Auditor General issued other reports for the MDAs, for DACF, the technical universities. And the Auditor General also issued a performance audit report. I would say that we should be interested in all the reports. But I'm happy about the one we're considering now, public boards, corporations, and statutory institutions, for one reason. Because the irregularities in that report is the highest of all the irregularities found in the other audits that the Auditor General conducted. For irregularities in public boards to increase by 135% is something that we should not accept. My challenge with the audit report, to start with, is that the Auditor General did not give us an indication of how recommendations in the previous audit, as far as public boards, corporations, and statutory institutions have been implemented, the status. The next one is the issue of surcharges and disallowance. I'm disappointed, I must say, because after the report has been issued, what next? We need our money. Those who have applied the money, those who have misappropriated the money, would have to bring the money back. Public Financial Management Act is clear that if it is procurement irregularities, Section 92 of Public Procurement Act applies. If it is misapplication, misappropriation, Public Financial Management Act applies. Article 187 is clear on the surcharges and disallowance powers of the Auditor General. The Supreme Court has also affirmed it. So what prevented the Auditor General from going straight to say that I have allowed this, I have surcharged this institution, this person must be taken on to refund the money? I see a number of things happening. What it means is that the audit and investigation is not conclusive. They are now going back to look for audit evidence that can support prosecution. And when you do that, you don't help the situation. That notwithstanding, I'm disappointed, but we will be able to resolve the issue because we have other state institutions that can start from somewhere. And something, let me also mention that the situation is bad, but we can make progress. Because for the MDA's audit, for instance, the Auditor General tells us that irregularities has reduced by 32%. For the DACF audit, the Auditor General tells us that it has reduced by 38%. For the technical universities audit, he's telling us that it has reduced by 92%. What it means is that something good is happening in the technical universities we need to pay attention to. And when you look at the total irregularities of all the audits he did, which came to about 14 billion, it represents 40% of the actual expenditure from the consolidated fund, which is no joke. What it means is that in the expenditure on the consolidated fund that was incurred for the 2020 fiscal year, 40% went down the drain through irregularities. We should not be happy at all. And as I sit here as a Director General of Internal Audit Agency, I am not happy at all. We should pursue it and then ensure that these monies are recovered. The next question then is, how do we move forward? The report is out. Now it is within the domain of the internal auditors, and under our public financial management systems, we have the audit committees. The functions of the audit committees under the Public Financial Management Act is to pursue management of state institutions to implement these recommendations. So now the onus is on these audit committees to do that. And let me mention that ahead of that, the Internal Audit Agency has met with the chairpersons of all these audit committees, and we have directed them to take steps to implement these recommendations. So this are my preliminary statement on this report. But I think the Auditor General could have done us a lot of good if he had gone ahead to disallow and surcharge. That would have given us more power to ensure that we enter into the recovery process.
You raise a number of issues, and I'd like us to deal with a couple of them one by one before we proceed. Now, the first issue, you mentioned the fact that he has issued a number of reports. In fact, that's the reason the president praised him. And if you follow the communication within the governing party, that's what they use and say he's done more work than any Auditor General ever did. And that brings to question. He's supposed to have done, is it about 12? Yes, 12 to 14 or so.
Yes.
But from my reading, you will see that he is referring to as many as 32. Now, you would find that in respect of, and I'm on their website, you will find that in respect of 2020, there are 7 reports. Then in respect of 2019, there are 9. And then 2018, you have 11. Now, if that is what is being sought, then it means that there will be 5 more remaining. Now, I've checked per section 23 of the Audit Service Act. Once these are ready, within 6 months, it ought to be published on the website, but you don't find all the others. Is there a way you can hazard an answer why this is so?
I think the ones that has not been published, I may not have an answer for that, but I really think that the Auditor General and his team has a lot of work to do. And if it has not been published, then maybe they haven't finalized those audits. And before you go into publication, you have to transmit it to Parliament. If it doesn't go to Parliament, you can't publish it. I think that is also part of the reason why they've not published it.
The Act actually says, Section 23 says, publication of report. It says the Auditor General shall publish his report on the public account, the report on the public accounts of Ghana, and the statement of foreign exchange receipts and payments of the Bank of Ghana as soon as the reports have been presented to the Speaker to be laid before Parliament. This is what he has done, and yet on the page, you don't find the full complement of the reports.
That we may have to reconcile. Look at the number of reports he submitted to Parliament as against the ones he's published on the website, and then ask questions. But I see that they may be facing some challenges as far as concluding some of the audits. In fact, when you look at Article 1875, it is clear that the Auditor General shall, within 6 months after the end of the immediately preceding financial year, so this one is talking about 2020, financial year to which each of the accounts relates, submit his report to Parliament and shall in that report draw attention to any irregularities in the accounts audited and to any other matter which, in his opinion, ought to be brought to the notice of Parliament.
So procedural questions I'm asking on the basis of how you started includes this one.
That's right.
From the perspective of the Constitution, you find that some of the reports are actually not new. So they would have been done a year ago or 2 years ago and ought to have been submitted 6 months.
That's right.
Into the financial year.
That's right. That's exactly my point, that the Constitution is saying for the immediate preceding financial year. So by this time, we should be talking about 2020 report.
Right.
We shouldn't be talking about 2019 and 2018. So for some reason, if we have arrears in report submission, then they have also breached the rule.
When it gets to Oliver, I'll ask whether there would be any, legal problems, constitutional issues when these matters come up, because when they come up, you know that people will begin to raise questions, particularly in court. Now, you say that your major worry is that there are no surcharges and disallowances. On the audit that the report is submitted for the District Assembly Common Fund, the accompanying, that should be the executive summary on it, that's on the page 2, paragraph 7. This is what he said. I call upon the Honorable Minister, the head of Local Government Service, and the administrators of the fund to take notes of my mandate under Article 1877B of the Constitution of the Republic of Ghana to disallow any item of expenditure which is contrary to law and surcharge the amount of any loss or deficiency upon any person by whose negligence or misconduct the loss or deficiency has been incurred. I will not hesitate holding them accountable. So you are expecting him to do this. He says it is the ministers who should be doing this.
The law did not give that power to the minister to do that. The law is clear. So he needn't remind the ministers of the powers given to him to disallow. He should just go ahead and disallow. I really do not expect him to indicate that he has that power. Everybody knows that is the law. How are you applying the power to prevent state institutions like the DACF from misusing the fund?
He says the minister should do that.
The minister, and he didn't quote any law. The law he quoted gave him the power. Right. So it means here he's reneging on his responsibilities and duties to apply the law. And the Constitution is clear. Nowhere, there's no law in this country that has mentioned that a minister for local government should be responsible for disallowance and surcharge. It's you, the Auditor General, who should do that. If you have failed to do it, why are you shifting blames? Interesting,
but you also mentioned that maybe they are now going to look for certain evidences. By my understanding, this report, are you suggesting it's not final? Now, when you look at the one on MDAs,
yes.
At I think at page 9, paragraph 12, he says, I have therefore included in this report my conclusions and recommendations intended to improve and further deepen effective public financial management and controls within the MDAs. Notwithstanding the recommendations, the infractions will be reviewed. The infractions will be reviewed further, and those found to be contrary to law may be disallowed and surcharged against the persons whose negligence caused the infractions.
So I think it's a waste of state resources if you want to go back and now do a review. In the process of doing the audit, you could have done that and evaluate the audit evidence that can support the disallowance and surcharge process. You see, if you are conducting an audit, what I know is that third parties are not involved. It's between the audit service and the auditing institutions. But if you issue a disallowance notice, it affects the third party, so they can join the case and then set it aside. So when you are doing your audit, you make sure once you are in this client space, you gather all this evidence, having in mind that if there is any disallowance or surcharge in future, you would have the appropriate audit evidence that is relevant, reliable for you to win.
Is that, is the Auditor General's report not final? And the Supreme Court answered the question somewhat in the Occupy Ghana versus Attorney General case. Okay. And I will crave your indulgence to read this very essential portion of the judgment. When they finished the whole case, they came to this and said, from the above discussions, it is quite apparent that the Auditor General has an obligation to ensure that his powers of disallowance and surcharge duly exercised by him under Article 1877 of the Constitution are complied with by the public entity or officials directly affected by the exercise of his powers of surcharge and disallowance. In conclusion, they said, in the premises, it is our considered view that using the principles of interpretation so eloquently and powerfully explained in the decision in the case of Tufor vs. Attorney General, Supra, and the purposive approach to interpretation generally, this court will interpret Article 178(7)(b) as having a mandatory effect insofar as the Auditor General's report is final. That's the Supreme Court. The Auditor General's report is final. They come again and say, in the premises, the plaintiffs succeed, that's Occupy Ghana, they succeed in their claim against the Attorney General in respect of reliefs 1, 2, and 3 as follows. What is relief 1? That upon a true and proper interpretation of Article 187(7)(bi) of the Constitution, the Auditor General is bound to issue a disallowance or surcharge where there has been any item of expenditure on behalf of the government that is contrary to law. 2. That upon a true and proper interpretation of Article 187(7)(bii) of the Constitution, the Auditor General is bound to issue a disallowance and surcharge where any person fails to bring any sum into the government's account. And finally, that upon a true and proper interpretation of Article 187(7)(bii) of the Constitution, the Auditor General is bound to issue a disallowance and surcharge where the government suffers or incurs a loss or deficiency through the negligence or misconduct of any person. As a sequel to our judgment just delivered, we further direct that henceforth the Auditor General shall take steps to recover the amount unlawfully expended from the person or persons who incurred and or authorized the disallowed expenditure. Secondly, the Auditor General shall also take steps, and please, I emphasize shall because they don't say it lightly, shall also take steps to recover the amount from the person or persons by whom the amount ought to have been brought into account. Thirdly, the Auditor General shall also take steps to recover the value of the loss or deficiency from the person or persons by whose negligence or misconduct the losses or deficiencies were incurred, whether or not the person is a public servant. And finally, the Auditor General is hereby ordered to take all necessary steps to enforce the decisions or steps taken by the Auditor General supra to ensure compliance, including, in some cases, criminal prosecutions. We have had to issue out the above consequential orders, even though we are happily aware that the current Auditor General, Daniel Yao-Domelevo, has taken steps to train his staff under CI 102 to prepare them adequately for the hearings in respect of the surcharge and disallowance appeals anticipated under Article 187(7) of the Constitution.
I think I see it as a capacity issue because they could have gone ahead to issue the surcharge and disallowance charge orders. But I think they are afraid because of the possibility of set aside in future. And then also how to do what we call audit evidence that can support prosecution. So one, I think I see this report as inconclusive because of the additional work they need to do. And that is also a waste of state resources. What it means is that you have to send another team to go and then do further investigation and collect additional audit evidence. So maybe in future, the Auditor General should try as much as possible to use the resource that he has to pursue the agenda in such a way that he will be able to issue his surcharge and disallowance orders as and when the audit is being conducted, so that the audit can be conclusive. But anybody can challenge this audit report that it is inconclusive. And he has indicated it in one of the reports, which is not the best. And he should not be afraid of set aside. When you have done good investigations, gathered adequate, relevant, and reliable audit evidence to support your case. Now somebody can say that the issues you've raised here do not have really a very good basis. You're standing on one leg. If you are yet to do further investigations, to gather further evidence, then where lies the import of this report? So I think, yes, he's brought the report, but in future, he should do the two together so he can save us some money.
Yes, Oliver.
Oh boy, there's a lot here. I mean, I was looking at both the 2019 and the 2020 in context, because it seems to me first one is there's a process question that I'm always interested in. So I wonder what the Auditor General conceives of his mandate to begin with. So you have, for instance, he's talking, and when you look at the 2019 report, I'm talking about the public boards one. Surcharge, the language surcharge appears about 13 times in the entire report of 1,134 documents. And then the other one, 2021, it appears well, 7 times, but only 4 of them consequential because the other 2 is describing something which is the name where side charge appears. Now, I'm looking at this, and it says for the Ghana Export Promotion Authority, which has spent nearly 17 million Ghana cedis without requisite approval, and says to them, go to Parliament and go and get retrospective approval so that we are not surcharged. And I wonder immediately, what do you conceive of your role? Your role is understanding that somebody has spent money without necessarily approval, which automatically invites you then to take the steps to disallow and surcharge. But you are advising the person how to get around the problem. And this happens in so many instances in the report that I'm wondering, isn't this a way of encouraging, rule breaking? Because you know that it can always be covered in the back. The second issue which I found quite surprising, again, the process question is, and relating to the mandate here, I'm seeing the Auditor General talk about, for instance, to Noguchi, that you don't have ISO accreditation and that it frustrates your lab and the way you do it. And I'm saying this again goes out of the realm of what you're supposed to be focused on. The mandate, as I understand it from the Constitution, is a 3-pronged mandate. Look at the public funds, report on it, and draw attention to irregularities and surcharge, disallow and surcharge. If you get then into questions where you are advising persons about how to get around the problem, 1. 2, when you're advising institutions about, or talking to them about issues that do not fall within your remit, they are doing everything rather than what you're required to do. And that's a question of concern for me. Then, going further from those supposed process questions, one of the things I find perhaps remarkable is that when you read the Occupy Ghana decision, the substance of the decision did not come from the Supreme Court itself. It came from Edward Ajimendua, this PowerPoint presentation that he made, where he came to the conclusion that there's no way we can proceed forward without really using the surcharge powers. And so the court even at some point says that we are not even relegating or abdicating our functions and taking Ajimendua's presentation as the substance of it. But the pith of what the court was saying is that they themselves know that the only forward out of this mess is to continue to use the surcharge powers. And so you get a broad and strong mandate from the court saying that this is the only way we can find corruption. And it says at the tail end that then we need to resource them more, the judiciary, the audit service, and all of that. One of the things I found peculiar is that when I was comparing 2016 and 2020, and we're talking about, they have done well and brought how many reports, there's an $80 million difference between what the audit service got in 2016 and now. So meaning that the problem is not a resource question. And I find that oftentimes when we're talking about institutions' failure to observe the law, we don't give this credit to individuals, only institutions. Then we turn it into a process, they lack capacity, and this is why those responses are quick to find. But since 2006, the audit service with the Auditor General itself knew that the only way out of our mess is this. Now, if you're getting to a point where 40% of drawdowns on a consolidated fund are lost in misapplication and misappropriation, then this is a bigger problem than we are willing to engage with. Finally, one of the things I find quite fascinating is definitely also around who the Auditor General thinks has the responsibility to surcharge and disallow. And it appears so many times beyond the context you draw attention to throughout the report. At some point, it says to the accountant, an accountant of one of the institutions, I think the College of Health Science, Noguchi, that the accountant failed to do this. So we are advising the accountant to surcharge, to disallow and surcharge. Then you have the College of Health Sciences, where about 500,000 Ghana cedis is invested in unapproved investment funds. Now, even on the trust system, if a trustee of a trust invests money in unapproved sources, immediately you surcharge the trustee for that. This person is saying to them that you may have done this, and note that you could be surcharged, and that it could be disallowed and it could be surcharged. And I'm wondering, what is this tendency to always deflect to pastoral advices whenever work needs to be done and how we setting forth a roadmap to how we proceed in this regard. Finally, one of the points Dr. Zai, you had made was about it could be set aside and all of that. I mean, it happens with tax administration.
Exactly.
There's a lot of tax assessment that eventually gets. That's the entirety of the process. So once you have this,
so that should not be a fear.
Yeah, it's not a fear at all. I mean, it's part of the process of work, how work is supposed to be done. But if we say these things and we fail to put in context that throughout our about 30 years of our democracy, the only attempt of a surcharge has come under Dumelovo. And then we know immediately connected to that what happened. It does not surprise me that an Auditor General who has been held in an acting position, for whatever reason, is now being lauded for, a report that is perfunctory at best, doesn't really set a roadmap of how we deal with rot, is being talked about as being better than, or whatever phrases we have used in this regard.
Right.
There's a real issue that comes from the top that is sending the message of how you need to conduct yourself in the office and kiss the ring before you are, you are entreated by the authorities that matter.
Yeah, so in setting aside, they, like Dr. Dosai said, they shouldn't be scared or afraid that it will be set aside because it's part of the process. When Dumelovo set aside or disallowed and made surcharges, some people went to court and they successfully set aside, including Zoom Lion. And they come up again in this report. We are told that the government has paid some 95 million Ghana cedis to the Sewage System Ghana Limited, a company it does not own shares in or have a contract with. The government in 2011 guaranteed the Accra Compost Plant to take a loan of 80 million cedis from Standard Chartered Bank. The government also guaranteed to pay the company for its cost of operations, which it has been doing up to date. And the Fourth Estate does a full story about that situation. They also do a story about the Auditor General's instruction that the government should suspend payment to Zoom Lion as the contract sum hits 324 million. 324 million. And these guys do a story and isolate the enormity of the situation where individuals who are employed as cleaners, and they have about 48,000 people across the country who are working under the sanitation model of the Youth Employment Agency. The government allocates 600 Ghana cedis to each sweeper. Out of this, 120 cedis goes to the sweeper and 420 goes to Zoom Lion as logistics and management fee monthly. This means out of the 7,200 Ghana cedis allocated to each sweeper annually, each sweeper receives only 2,160, while the lion's share of 5,040 Ghana cedis goes to Zoom Lion. Now, this is also worrying because this government in 2016 had raised alarm. It said Mohammed's government is wasting 500 million on shady firm. So, question being asked, when you read things, these sort of details in these things, how does it come to you?
I think one of the things I'm surprised is when you take, for a while now, almost all these reports, you are likely to find Zoom Lion or any of the 100 and almost perhaps now 300 and something companies under that umbrella making a feature in our reports. And we know that this company or group of companies have been blacklisted by the UN in other countries. But consistently, nobody has sat down and said, under what terms are we doing business with this private entity? That there's always some issues around these things that always come up in our reports.
They were de-blacklisted after a couple of years.
So we have never had that process, right? Where we have that conversation and interrogate the relationship that this business has with government resources. One of the things that brought Jacob Zuma down in South Africa was the relationship with the Guptas and how private individuals had been given so much access and the kind of this thing they were getting. So I'm surprised that we've never had that conversation in the context of the reports. But secondly as well, one of the things you realize, and a huge chunk of the money is related to procurement irregularities.
Right.
And you find that we have one of the incidences of our laws and the ways we implement them is that they're often very disjuncted. So you have the Companies Act, which is talking about, okay, let's just disclose beneficial ownership. Now, when it comes to the application of the procurement processes, we never ask ourselves, why is it that the 3 companies which have been shortlisted have the same beneficial owner? And for which reason it then frustrates or defeats the purpose of the public procurement process. These are questions that necessarily will not appear in an audit service report. Because the audit service report, which we are talking about, is dealing with 40% of this thing. It's only saying that this money was disbursed for this purpose, and I do not find it, or this authorization was not received. It doesn't tell us about, well, X amount was inflated, or X amount of money which was budgeted for a particular process or anything was more than it should have been estimated, or secondly, that in the procurement example I gave, the same companies belonging to the same individual were shortlisted for the same thing. It doesn't deal with the significant amount of sole sourcing that exists, and it's one of the main drivers of corruption in this country. So even as we are discussing this report, it's only a minuscule of the entirety of the corruption problems that we have to deal with, generally.
All right, interesting. Now, I'm going to Bright to tell us his views of which aspects of the audit report that he wants to focus on and what he has to say. And these are institutions that have also been empowered to surcharge, disallow, and then even prosecute. But the general view is that this money gets stolen and nobody is made responsible. So before I ask Bright the question, let me run you through this small slide that I have on the screen. So if you're watching, I have just gone through, before I started, I went through the irregularities committed by state institutions. And we spoke about the cash irregularities being 1.8 billion, the payroll irregularities being 9.6 million, the procurement irregularities 846.1 million, tax irregularities 29.2 million, stores irregularities 11.5 million, contract irregularities 89.8 million. Remember that Dr. Drosai had told you that this is not the whole picture. So let's move on to the next slide. Let me show you something again. If you're watching, just look at how it looks. It's really, really, really terrible. 2016, 2017. Okay, so let's go to this next slide. We are talking billions here. ECG. It has been revealed that the ECG between 2014 and 2016 procured prepaid meters and contracts worth 59 million, but the machines are still locked up in the company's warehouse. Who will do such a thing with their private company or private money? You buy things worth 59 million Ghana cedis and you lock them up. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I seem to be laughing, but it's not a laughing matter, really. ECG, these are the losses that are spoken about. Power that they purchased, 10,900.55 gigawatt hours. Then out of that, power sold 8,251.47 gigawatt hours. Still on ECG, ECG lost 2,649.08 gigawatt hours, which represents 24.30% of power purchased from the power producing companies to system losses. This is despite the creation of revenue protection divisions and installation of automatic meter reading. So we spend money to do all sorts of things and yet no results. Out of the total figure of 1.8 billion cash irregularities, 442.73 million represented cash locked up in non-performing investments by SNET. You may have read that as well. So pensioners' money gone and can't be found. Let's go to the next. And I am pretty much aware that some people are giving reactions on TV and radio. But what I'll let you know is that the reactions on TV and radio are inconsequential and are not supposed to be taken into account by anybody. Because before the Auditor General issued the report, they served them with management letters and they gave their reactions to the Auditor General. And the Auditor General incorporated their reactions. So allowing them to come on the media and to now seek to suggest otherwise is wrong. We shouldn't give them that opportunity. GNPC, according to the report, GNPC signed and awarded 5 international business contracts, 5 of them, between 2015 to 2018 without the necessary parliamentary approval. That's where Dr. Osai's agency is peeved. The Northern Development Authority is said to have invested an amount of 5 million into an investment company, Man Capital Microfinance Limited, in 2015. The investment was done without the approval of the Finance Ministry. Let's go on. According to the report, the 5 million investment, which was made in December 2015, grew to 7.1 million. 7.1 million in June of 2018. June of 2018, it grew to 7.1 million. Now, however, Man Capital was among the 347 microfinance entities whose licenses were revoked by the Bank of Ghana during the cleanup of the sector. Then the Buffer Stock Company also made payments in the sum of 1.9 million for goods and services, including purchases of fuel coupons. Fuel coupons. Those of you who go and get the fuel coupons free of charge from your political people who have been appointed into the offices, who feel they cannot, they don't account to us. So fuel coupons and maintenance activities were without approval and authorization of both the senior finance officer and the chief executive officer. Okay, so that's just a gist for you. Right, there have been various aspects of the audit reports that's being serialized by various media houses. Which parts attracts your attention and what do you have to say?
Thanks, Samson. So, obviously on the face of a casual reading or following a casual reading, the problems are extremely alarming. You're talking about an increase in the MDA categories, and I think it's been pointed out that a number of different audits have been performed, and so we are not talking about one single audit, it's a number of audits. And in the MDA category, the ministries, department, agencies, what you might call the core government, it suggests that we've seen an increase in irregularities from 2011 of $64 million to the current situation of $366 million. So that is like a 5-fold increase in a decade. And that's problematic, and that's highly problematic. But you have to delve deeper into the Auditor General reports over a period of time to understand a number of critical patterns that I think very often the discussions that we have of it do not surface. And one very important, rather I have 4 important dimensions of this caveat that I need to delve into in order for my point to be clear. So 1, consistently, the Auditor General reports have been riddled with serious errors, some of which undermine the integrity of the whole process. I'll give you an example. 2016, about 75% of all the irregularities in the public boss audits was related to a purported instance of $370 million in irregularities attributed to the Tema Oil Refinery. The Tema Oil Refinery was supposed to have made debits to the petroleum accounts or the petroleum revenue accounts to the tune of $370 million. That entire report from the Auditor General was, excuse my language, balderdash, made no sense, because the Tamale refinery has no access to make debits to petroleum revenue accounts in our regime. So essentially, 75% of that irregularity, that stock of irregularities, was useless, which means the Auditor General didn't do their work properly. We've talked about this Noguchi matter that has been hinted at by Mr. Vomawo. And the fact of the matter is that there are departments in Noguchi, and the different departments have different quality management systems, some of which are indeed ISO accredited, like the Department of Parasitology and others. So what we've discovered over time, when you've actually delved into the process of delivering these audits, is that there is a significant challenge with the personnel who conduct these audits often not knowing enough about the organization that they have been assigned to audit. The Auditor General's department ought to enter into a phase where it begins to specialize, to create conditions for its personnel to specialize in the organizations to which they are assigned, so that when they understand the system that is in operation, it's more likely that some of these errors will not repeat, because some of them are of hugely substantive nature. There is also a situation where I think in some instances we do have legal confusion, which has to be cleared. So the GNPC matter that you mentioned, and which you hint that Dr. Sai has a particular interest in, is definitely legally complicated, because we have a series of Supreme Court decisions, beginning from Balkan Energy through Faro Atlantic, through Clomega, and the famous Makasibe Yeboah matter, which does suggest that public corporations do not require parliamentary approval for international business transactions unless they can be held to be an alter ego of the central government. Those are clear decisions. In fact, in the last one, the Sibe Yeboah case, for instance, the Supreme Court nearly threw the book at the lawyers for Mr. Makasibe Yeboah, because they were the view that they've pronounced very clearly on this matter of international business transactions that involve public and statutory corporations. So somebody at the legal department, Auditor General, ought to, at this stage, produce some kind of opinion that guides it. So we don't have this situation where GNPC says you don't know what you are doing and better find some trained people. It's not comely, it's not becoming. The second major area of concern that I have is the fact that the way that we currently do the classification of irregularities focuses on the source of the irregularities. So there are 7 broad sources of the irregularities: contract, procurement, payroll, etc. Somewhat arbitrary, but it's fine. The big concern that I have is that the nature in which some of these irregularities emerge do not accord or align with the way in which we've classically defined what an irregularity is, which is that it's either a loss, so a loss to the state due to the actions of public sector officials, or potential for savings not actualized because they did not exercise due care. So that's really how we've defined irregularities. So when you look at a situation where state agencies are not paying their SNET, the social security liabilities, or they are not remitting pay-as-you-earn tax, is that a loss to the state? Because if I'm a state agency and I'm a subvented agency, and the government does not give me enough money to pay the social security entitlements of my workers, how is that a loss to the state? To me, it's a neutral classification. If you take a situation where, for instance, half of the irregularities in the debt category, so then I'll talk about sources of irregularity. So the debt category is one of the sources. And you will find out that in the public board's audit, as much as half of all the irregularities in the debt category, which was by far the highest for this year, I think about 90% or something of that sort, half of those are energy sector debts due to the government not paying its bills. So a bunch of state-owned enterprises hold sway in the energy sector. They don't pay each other. This accumulates into debt. How is that a loss? I'm not too sure that we should categorize those as losses in the way that we've defined these losses in the irregularities space. We have farmers that have been given inputs on credits that are not paying because of the nature of the subsidy regime. Yes, that is a loss, but it relates to structural issues in our politics, and making it appear as if it's a technocratic or administrative matter which an audit can fix is not very clear to me. We have situations where, for instance, in the loans and debts irregularities category in 2020 for core government, as much as 91% of those irregularities are debts that are owed by medical facilities in the public sector to private sector suppliers of medicines and medical products. Now, if a hospital in Ghana cannot pay its debts, why is that a loss to the state? I'm not sure I understand the logic. And how is that a potential for savings? So I think that we need to get into some more structured, some more rigorous analysis of what we mean by irregularities, and then get into a sub-classification where, in addition to the source classification into 7 categories, for each of them we take class 1 irregularity and we explain that this is indeed a loss to the state. Things like misrepresentation and fraud in the accounts, and things like misappropriation, things like misapplication of public funds. And then when it's an issue to do, which is somewhat contentious, to do with macroeconomic context, to do with government not having money because of fiscal constraints, and for that reason, certain actions are not taken, they are not losses. So we don't classify them as class 1 irregularities. Maybe they are class 2 irregularities of a different kind. The third issue I have is the absence of materiality thresholds in the entire design of the audit process. Materiality is a critical component of audit logic. If you go into an audit situation and you report everything you see, you create a situation where you are hiding important germs in a sea of nonsense. So what we have is that most people don't read Auditor General's report because it's 1,000 pages, much of it insignificant, and heavily concentrated problems, which are hugely significant and which we should focus on, like the deteriorating loan book as net, like the issues to do with single sourcing and procurement abuse at GNPC. But when you have a situation where 44 cedis owed by Coca-Cola Bottling Company to Cocoa Clinic in Kumasi has been reported, what is the materiality? Why should a member of parliament be worried about Coca-Cola Bottling Company owning 44 cedis to Cocoa Clinic, or Exim Guarantee owing 76 pesos to Cocoa Clinic? 76 pesos is ridiculous. There is one instance where somebody is mentioned that they have not retired their interest, a certain Patricia Amankwa, and this Patricia Amankwa has not retired interest of 190 cedis. This is not material. And if you put all of that stuff in a report, you create these giant reports that nobody reads. And so we get lost, and everybody just hears the sound bites and we don't delve into it. My last area of concern is this tendency of this particular audit service regime, which I mean the 2020 regime, not to get involved in controversial matters because they have a political coloration of some kind. I don't understand why in auditing, and that also speaks to the unevenness around the report. So in some cases, you'll find a very diligent auditor who has 20 pages of analysis, including the CCTV performance of a place, and then you have another report and it's 3 paragraphs. And those of us in civil society that deal with this all the time, because we're reading reports all the time, know there's far more going on. So take the Ghana Airport Company Limited matter. We've delved deeply into Frontiers. We know there are a lot of irregularities in Frontiers. They didn't mention Frontiers at all. We've delved deeply into National Lotteries Authority. We know when it comes to this tech stack, N5 Lotto devices matter, Joy FM did investigations. We saw some of those reports. We have far more data on that. Huge irregularities in National Lotteries Authority, huge losses. None of that mentioned in the section on National Lotteries Authority. We have done extensive studies on the Electoral Commission, by far one of the most abusive of all the state institutions we have in this country, to the point where repeatedly they are not audited because they refuse to give you information. Go and check consistently consecutive Auditor General reports and see if you can find detailed audit of the Electoral Commission in most of them. You will not find them. An asset audit has not been conducted for almost a decade, a proper asset audit. We know for sure that they bought devices in 2018, 2019. They came to tell people in Ghana that millions of dollars spent on these devices have not been spent at all. But in fact, they've not bought devices since 2011. We knew that to be false. Where is the asset audit of the Electoral Commission? Why is the Auditor General, the current acting Auditor General, hiding from doing their duty and going there and subjecting them to strict audits? So we have concerns about this tendency to shy away from tackling political issues. And in that respect, I agree with Mr. Vomawa that Mr. Domelovo set a bar that has not been met. He went after the senior minister, the senior-most minister, and he said, I am going to disallow this crawl thing because you did not follow the standards. You see, the senior minister won on a technicality around natural justice and fair hearing and things like that. The substantive matter still remains important. If you are going to stay away from or shy away from politically sensitive matters, you have no duty in audit. Thank you.
Interesting. I guess we can pause here. I actually draw the curtains on this issue here, unless you have a few things to say.
I do.
But I invite Ghanaians, please, those of you who spend quite a lot of time on social media, just getting into unproductive things, go to the Auditor General's website. Just pick one of the audits. Go to the details. Bright has decided to go to just some bits of some of the details. And when you go there, you will begin to feel the need to be a citizen and not be a spectator. Because you have a lot of money in this country that is going waste and nobody is accounting for them. We have spent money on abandoned projects. We have spent millions of Ghana cedis. And then when we finish, they are not occupied. Nobody uses them. They are sitting there for years. The auditor reports and he's not happy about it. The District Assembly Common Fund, deducted from source, even before it gets to the people who are supposed to use them. They deducted how much for one particular entity for fumigation and whatever. And the service has not been rendered, but the money has gone, it's gone. The fumigation may not be needed any later. Payment for unexecuted contract, payment for non-existent, things. Go read them. If you don't weep and change what you do on social media, so let's hear you quickly and then we take a break.
Thank you very much, Samson.
I think, let me, for the purpose of the discussions, no auditor goes into audit without certain materiality levels. So that I need to correct that impression. There is a materiality level, except that maybe the Auditor General did not indicate the materiality level set in that particular audit. So if you read further, you may see the materiality level, because the essence of materiality is to allow you to either do sampling audit or 100% audit, and to also lay emphasis on important areas. You may see a figure that is so immaterial, but the Auditor General is interested in how the irregularity occurred, so he will be able to profile solutions. The issue of EC, I must say that EC has submitted an annual report to us at the Internal Audit Agency for 2020 and then the 2019. So we have a copy of that report. And then the capacity issues, I think I've mentioned it, because the Auditor General's office needs a capacity overhaul so they can have legal people who understand public sector financial management. Because when you look at public sector financial management, it is a specialized area. So I may want to agree with him.
So normally, whose fault is it that you have 2016 audits, 2017? We are doing that today. What's the issue?
I think it's a capacity issue, and it's about numbers.
Is the Auditor General that's not ready, or the audit service that's not ready, or it is the entities that have delayed in making you audit them?
You see, it's a problem of one, the institutions where the documents are not available. We need records, they are not available. And the Auditor General is just an individual and whose work is to be supported by an audit service staff. And if he doesn't have the staff to undertake the audit, for instance, the GNPC and the others, you need some expertise. If they are not available, you can't do it. So I think it's a challenge and a conversation we need to have to make sure that the audit service is well capacitated. And I think they are doing their best, because they draw our attention to highest level of irregularities in all the audits. And this is in the areas of debtors, loans, and other outstanding issues. For the MDAs, it's 54%. For the DACF, it's 30%. For the technical universities, 30%. And for public boards, 78%. Which means there's something fundamentally wrong with the way we manage our debtors and loans portfolios. Because it forms the highest irregularities. For the MDAs, 54%. For technical universities, 30%, for public boards, 78%. So the Auditor General has drawn our attention. We need to look at it.
But like you said, beyond drawing our attention, you have the power to surcharge, disallow, and then prosecute. As the law says, okay, that's not, prosecution is not their job. The state has to do it. Yes.
2 points, primarily. And perhaps let me start from the last point. I think one of the things I want to highlight is that the entirety of this report is not only the business of the Auditor General in disallowing and surcharging, that other coordinate institutions that exist in the space must be able to look at the reports and advise themselves as to what they can do in addition to. And I say this in particular regard to one of the points that you were making about the outstanding debt portfolio, which we are having, 10 billion out of the 12 billion, which accounts for that. And in their report, what is striking to me is that they use the same language in the 2019 report and the 2020 report, where they are saying that the reason of this is absence of effective debt collection policies, non-existence of credit controls to recover the debt, management's indifferent posture towards loan recovery contributed significantly to these anomalous conditions. They also say improper maintenance of records on debtors, absence of debtors aging analysis, non-documentation of agreements stipulating the terms and conditions of loans, failure to ensure that the loans are repaid, and management's non-compliance with rules and regulations accounted for these irregularities. These are their own words. Now, all I see as a lawyer reading this is crime. And it says this in 2019 and in 2020. And in their recommendation, all they say about it is that we advise the management to adhere to rules and regulations with regards to debt management consistently. So I'm saying there's a disconnect, right? Where you're dealing with the most, pernicious of all the problems you're dealing with. And I'm consistently talking about how these loan frameworks become sort of a legalized money laundering framework. Because we do know that the state is going to get disinterested. We do know that the state is not going to keep proper records on debtors. That the state doesn't even have some of the agreements themselves. Then it tells you that it's an easy source way to get nearly $10 billion. There's a point Bright makes as well about what we are characterizing as losses and refusal to pay debt. And perhaps, so that it doesn't degenerate into a sort of a highly intellectual conversation, I do think that these questions need to be reported and discussed. Because even the perception of what loss is and what debt is not necessarily foreclosed. So for instance, even if the government fails to pay an institution, and for which reason it is reported, you're failing to recognize that some of these institutions might have also taken some loans, which they're expecting some money to be paid into. And so you're creating downstream losses, again, that are created because of the failure to pay certain debt. You talk about SNIT, for instance. The failure then to pay an individual SNIT creates a significant amount of risk because the individuals in the SNIT must be able to sue sue the agency. And then this creates, a burden of having to defend this. And then money is then expended again to these matters as well. So they all have downstream effects in a particular way. But I generally agree with the need to better segregate and aggregate the information so that certain, information is not, we are not lost in 1,000 pages trying to find information that is relevant.
Well, if an employer fails or does not pay the SNIT contribution of their employee, it doesn't matter that it's one peswa. He might go to jail for it. If they take our money, then they should also, take care of the money well. We are told that the value of Ghana's 126 state-owned enterprises is worth 110 billion cedis. And that represents about 27% of our GDP for 2020. Please let that sink in well. Now, if this is not troubling, what is? That these entities that have the capacity to contribute 11 billion Ghana cedis to the national coffers are so mismanaged that they made a loss of almost 600 million in 2019. 47 of them have never submitted the basic but important and legally mandated annual financial statements for 5 solid years. You see, if you pick a politician, square peg, and put them in a round hole, and they don't get punished, this is what goes on. 5 years, basic financial statements, annual statements, they don't present it, and nothing happens to them. Yet, like I said, these managers will still have their job, despite superintending the impunity in violating the Public Financial Management Act. In 2019, only 14 out of the 126 state-owned entities or enterprises met this mandatory legal requirement of submitting their annual statements. We'll take a break. We'll return to visit GNPC and Aker Energy. Get ready for Bright Simmons. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Lexus Bill, host of Drive Time on Joy 99.7 FM. Listen, you don't have to worry if you miss Drive Time or Personality Profile. It's going to be live on our podcast page. Just log on to www.myjoyonline.com/podcast. You can listen to Drive Time, Personality Profile, and any other of your favorite shows on Joy FM on that page. You don't have to miss a show at all. Joy 99.7 FM, radio for discerning listeners.
Yeah, welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. And my guest, Bright Simmons, Honorary Vice President, Imani Africa, Oliver Baka, Vormawo. He is researcher, University of Cambridge, Faculty of Law. Dr. Eric Odrosai, Director General, Internal Audit Agency, that's the IAA. Some of your comments before we go to GNPC. Kwesi Kisiedu says, fellow Ghanaians, please do note that corruption kills the innocent. Eschew corruption, and let's build Mother Ghana together fairly. Ewenam says, it's okay for the president to commend persons that have excelled in discharging their responsibilities. The theory of rewards and punishment. What I find intriguing is his unhealthy comparison of the acting Auditor General to Domelevo. What was that meant to achieve? Avoidable. Prince Henry in Koforidia says, it is very wrong for President Akufo-Addo to even compare the acting Auditor General and the former Auditor General, Daniel Domelevo, in terms of fighting corruption, when the President is yet to confirm the acting Auditor General. Mr. President should be seen to be neutral and not praising one. Collins, if the authorities of society are not in the course of reason and assimilation, then rejecting such authorities and replacing them with a logical and humane alternative is not anarchy. That's a bit, I have to try and understand that. It's the existential duty of every thinking and feeling human. A.J. Nyavo John says, the president is just paying lip service to the fight against corruption. And it's not surprising because he's neck deep. All right, you need to speak with where you have the evidence. Maestro, as someone says, using words such as misappropriation instead of stealing is a clear message to the nation that the AG, as the Auditor General, is just telling us, and nothing will be done about these indictments. Oh, that's the language they all use. It's not about this particular one. Ray Wilson. Ray Wilson says, Zoom Lion continues to feature in Auditor General's report for one way or the other. There are irregularities in doing stuff, yet no one is questioning Zoom Lion. Are they untouchable? And then Jake says, we have all the anti-corruption agencies in Ghana, yet issue of corruption is still skyrocketing. Is it that the agencies themselves are also corrupt or are sleeping on the job, taking fat salaries and allowance each month? He said, read the Auditor General's report. The cash, tax, contract, payroll, and procurement irregularities happening now are perhaps even worse than what this government called incompetent in opposition. They promised to do better, but what has changed? Remember that this report has 2016 audits, 2017, 2018. So there's a bit that goes back to 2016. Jama Woyele says that Zongo Banku, says that the more they create anti-corruption agencies, the worse we perform on the CPI. Sad. Schofield, Man Kujo, you are the last person's message I read. It says, clearly the Auditor General's report is inconclusive. He doesn't want to be an ambush auditor, and so has given some space for review. This is what we do, and then we mislead the people in the public. The Auditor General's report, like the Supreme Court ruling I read to you, says the report is final. It's not supposed to be interim. Something the former Auditor General failed to do. He was not supposed to give you interim audit reports. They don't do that, okay? All right. So, okay, so let me take just one or two more here. This one, your message, Gabi, your message is long, but I'll read. It says, it's important to note the content of the Auditor General's report. They are current. You will see, for instance, this 2020 report, most of the MDAs have 2019, 2018, and 2017, and some are 2016. These are what we have to work on and ensure that the reports are current. Thus, the MDAs must be made to comply with the law establishing them, most of which have to do with the fourth month after year end. I didn't get that portion correctly, but you say also that the report to Parliament, the Auditor General determines which management issues to pick from the long report, and his report is final. Thank you for your message. Ansayabwa, okay, YK Ansayabwa. Your message is too long. I can't read that so long. All right. So we are here until sometime 12:20. Now let's go to Bright Simmons again and begin from the matters of the GNPC Aka Energy matter, which we began to deal with 2 weeks ago. It does appear that issue will not go away any soon. We speak to Bright. I come to Dr. Odrosai, who has raised issues and says that GNPC cannot position itself above parliamentary approval for international transactions. It appears on that score, you and Bright may clash on a few of the issues there. Right, so Bright, this, GNPC Aka Energy matter, I thought that they have supplied us some good information that suggested that what they are seeking to do is in the interest of the Republic.
Sorry, was that a premise? Or are you? I'm not too sure.
Yeah, it's a question. It's a question. Some of you are being tagged as anti-Ghana.
Mm-hmm. No, I disagree. I think that first of all, the information that I've provided is scanty. Unfortunately for them, the information that is out there in the public domain, especially for those of us that have been following matters in the oil industry for many years, for a decade and more, where we've commented severely. Imani was the first organization to point to technical decisions taken by Tallow that we said will impair output in Jubilee. We started talking about that as far back as 2008 and 2009. Nobody was discussing these matters. And today, people make it look as if concerns around, FPSO turrets and concerns around water injections and some of all of these decisions that now sand contamination, et cetera, are commonplace. No, they weren't. When we started talking about these matters in 2008, 2009, nobody else took it serious. And now we know that there's underperformance in Jubilee and the recovery rates in our fields are very low. So my point is that, because of our familiarity with the issues in the industry, because our familiarity with the policy regime and the rest of it, we are able to independently analyze the information that is available, but which the GNPC has not necessarily put out, and come to the conclusion that the transactions that they are trying to foist on the people of Ghana, trying to get the state of Ghana to borrow on our credit and give them the money for these misadventures are not in our favor. And I'm not sure how you want the pattern of question and answer to proceed, or whether you just want me to go ahead and keep explaining our position.
Well, so I just needed you to begin with your preamble and then go. I don't know if we have the time. The time will admit that, but would have gone through point by point the issues as have been raised by Professor Hinson, and which you also take on one after the other and provide your position to suggest that he is clueless as far as the issues are concerned. So that if you wanted, for starters, beyond what Professor Hinson has said, the GNPC themselves have issued us a statement and suggested to us their position on some of these issues. Professor Hinson raises the topic, GNPC will merge the fields. He says this is false. They will not merge the fields. Mr. Simmons claims that GNPC is to merge the fields and create an SPV, a special purpose vehicle. How can two fields be merged physically? Again, Mr. Simmons plays with reality to fit his narrative. The GNPC is only saying that the joint operator company will be the operator of both fields. What do you say?
No, those are completely peripheral and irrelevant matters. Obviously, I'm not a novice in this space. I don't think that two fields that are hundreds of miles apart, or can be merged by taking shovels and digging one into the other. So I'm not even sure we need to be spending any time at all on these very peripheral and irrelevant issues. Okay. The critical concerns we have are about threefold. We argue that, first of all, we need to separate, and this is a preliminary context, we need to separate discussions about the two fields. There are not one field, but there are two fields. So you've got, and for, the names get confusing, so people don't want to follow the conversation. I will call the bigger field Pecan, after the main discovery there. There are three discoveries that have been declared commercial: Almond Beach, Pecan. Pecan is the big one and is the one that is going to be developed. The block as a whole is called Deepwater Tunnel Cape 3 Points. But in order for people to be able to follow, I'll call it Pecan. Then you've got a second one called the SWDT block that has a main discovery called Nyankom. So I'll call that one Nyankom. It's important, first of all, that we look at the two fields separately. The GNPC wants to buy significant stakes in both. Now, our concern is that when you do an analysis of either of these fields, you come to conclusions that are starkly opposite to what the GNPC has come up to. So I'll take them one after the other and then I'll go through them. So when it comes to Nyankom, our position is primarily threefold. We say that this field has a 50% success rate in terms of the two wells that were dug to try and find oil, the two exploratory wells that were to find oil. The second one was so disappointing that after making some PR noise about its prospectivity, the whole well has more or less been banished out of prospectus of both GNPC and ACA. The Nyankom one that was successful is not that prolific compared to other opportunities that are in our basin. And we give examples of the Erin block in the expanded shallow water tunnel block, where we have that 14 wells. Several of them have undergone production testing. The contingent resources, which is from the data we have, what we are kind of pretty sure we might be able to get. I mean, it's not as rigorous as proven or probable resources, but you don't have proven or probable resources in Nyankom either. So we are using the same benchmark to evaluate both the Erin block and the Nyankom block. And the Erin block has about 500 million barrels of oil equivalent when you use the same yardstick. So it's like about 500 million barrels of oil is there. The company that got that deal has a subsidiary called Kamak Energy. The parent company is filed for bankruptcy protection. We have relinquishment provisions because the extensions that were given to them have elapsed. They've not done the work program they were supposed to do. There are clauses in the contract that can be activated. There are a whole range of things that will happen in a few years' time. That block is going to revert back to Ghana. When it reverts back to Ghana, the government has the power to give 75% of it to GNPC. And then GNPC has the power to go to Halliburton, to go to Technip and these other people, enter into strategic arrangements like we tried to do with Technip from 2012 onwards. And if in that instance, we want to be an operator in partnership with a technical services company that responds primarily to us, that is fine. And we're going to spend very little in terms of acquiring the rights. With all the money we'll spend will go into developing those fields and moving them into production. When you talk of Nyankpom, which is highly risky, where the data is not so favorable, we want to spend in the region of, because they valued it at about $700 million. If we negotiate based on the $1.1 billion ceiling we have and we buy it for about $400 million, we are shortchanging ourselves. We think for a field where appraisal has not even been done to actually confirm the volumes that we think are there, and where the volumes are not substantive in terms of what we already know, and which nevertheless has significant upside, the right approach is to wait for the private sector to derate the field. And if they don't, until we change the law, we went back to Parliament and changed the terms of that agreement. The relinquishment provisions were very aggressive and would have got the field anyway. So it's two things. Either they go there, do more drilling to confirm for us that the oil is really there, in which case, at that point, we might want to then participate. Or if they don't continue, because of relinquishment, the field is going to come back to us anyway, as a country. So given those dynamics, it doesn't make sense to invest in Nyankpom at all, unless we are getting it for dead cheap. That's our first position. Regards to Pecan, we concede that with Pecan, there's been some drilling that has been quite interesting. But the funny thing in respect of Pecan is that the amount of money that we think it's worth itself is so problematic that the $1.1 billion ceiling we have from Parliament to spend is very likely that we will spend too much of it. And the position of civil society is that we should spend very little of it. We think we should spend about $400 million or much less. And the reason is pretty simple. It's pretty simple. It's simple arithmetic. First, the Minister of Energy himself has convinced us that when it comes to Ghana, as far as recovery rate is concerned, we should use about 25%. So after you've established what you think is very probable in that field, what we often call the 2P, you have to discount it further by the recovery rate that the minister himself has been promoting since 2019 when he started engaging in this debate. If you do that, the amount of oil you are likely to get will come down significantly. It may come down to as low as 70 million barrels in terms for you to use for your analysis, in terms of what is the most rigorous volume estimates that are possible. But let's even be generous and say 100 and something million barrels and the rest of it. Then you need a break-even cost of production point. And that break-even point, we think $35 is still the reasonable amount because all the concepts that ACA has been promoting around has not gone through a proper scrutiny of a POD analysis. If you use $35 as the cost of getting the oil out of the ground, now you've got a certain profit. You're going to get that money over a period of time, let's say 15 years, 20 years. You discount it using the 10% that they want to use for Pecan, which we're not quarreling too much with. You get around the numbers that we are talking about. You don't get the numbers that they are talking about. The attempt to value that, in the range of 1.3 billion, getting to 1.5 billion and the rest, and value the two fields at $2 billion, is based on assumptions that are highly aggressive and contradict everything we know about the fields. Remember, before HERS, which has held the Pecan block from 2006 until 2018, before HERS, or at least held the majority, before HERS left, they had drilled 7 wells. They had discovered almost everything we knew about the field by 2013. It was only because of its loss that they didn't go ahead and go into a more aggressive plan of development. Then after it lost, the environment changed, the market environment changed. We went into a low price environment at some point and the rest of it, they decided to leave because there were better prospects elsewhere, like in Guyana and the rest. But they knew that despite the fact that they'd already established about 330 million barrels of oil equivalent there, of which about 250 million of which was probable or proven, they knew that nonetheless, there was a lot of de-risking yet. So when they were selling out to ACA, they sold it for $100 million. We're arguing that when ACA then came and drilled 2 additional wells, Pecan South, Pecan Southeast, the results that they got suggested that maybe they could add maybe 5 to 15 million barrels of oil equivalent to it, etc., etc. It wasn't that interesting, which is why they then went around trying to raise money, etc., etc., finding it very difficult to raise money. They cut the cost that they need to develop. They said they will only start with some of the first, etc. They still could not raise the money. They came back. They are there for $100 million. Our key argument is that they have not de-risked it enough by doing additional investment to prove that they have added too much sufficient value for us to now start to value those fields at above $1 billion. So in that regard, giving them anything up to $200 million is plenty. Then they talk about the issue of costs. Oh, okay, but they've spent some money and the rest of it. Well, first of all, that is not how they've been valuing the fields. They've been valuing the fields in terms of what oil we are likely to get from it, the earnings in terms of oil, and the present value of that amount if you take away costs and use a reasonable discount rate. So their costs are not really that relevant to the valuation. But the truth of the matter is that they exaggerate the costs too. They talk about, $800 million spent by one party and the rest of it. And when you go to the annual reports of the companies themselves, and you look at what they filed in stringent jurisdictions, you can't find that amount. You find, for instance, Hess saying that they spent about $268 million in the field. You find ACA, and particularly the parent company, TRG, suggesting that, they spent a couple of $100 million. When you add all of that together, you don't get into in the region of $800 and something million, much less the $1.2 billion that GNPC claims it will have spent. Why is that important? It's important because while it's irrelevant to the valuation debate, what GNP is actually suggesting is that when the time comes for taxation, which is how we get our revenue, most of our revenue from these fields, all of these costs are going to have to be offset. And we are saying that that is actually a very dangerous thing for them to be saying, because we know they've not spent that amount in those fields, because due to publicly available information.
Okay,
when you analyze all the information I've given you, it's quite obvious that we are getting a very raw deal as a country, which is why we are suggesting that they should pay very little for PICAM, and they should not touch Nyancom until private sector has de-risked it sufficiently.
So 1.6 billion is too much as far as you are concerned. But from where I say
1.65 billion is what GNPC wants.
Yes, 1.65 billion.
Only $1.3 billion was what we were going to use to buy the fields.
Right.
Parliament said they should spend only $1.1 billion.
Right.
So they have a ceiling. They have been given a blank check of $1.1 billion to negotiate a stake. We are saying that they should spend far less than that $1.1 billion. That is really the sum of our argument.
I clearly don't have a deeper grasp of this subject as much as you do, but GNPC and those involved tell us that these are the benefits that will come to this country. More importantly, in May, or was it in March 2021, ExxonMobil suddenly leaves this country after the 3 years of work in the deep tunnel area. And if this country had developed the local capacity, we would have been able to take over and deal with this situation to our own benefit. So they say the present transaction that they are looking at will give us taxes and royalties approximately $7.5151 billion in nominal terms. It will give us substantial foreign exchange inflows estimated around 27 billion in nominal terms, US dollars. If I read this, I have a difficulty. The basis to challenge what they say and why I should not be interested that the country is going to reap all of these benefits.
Okay, so it's very simple. You just use their own analysis in 2019 when they went to Parliament twice, June and December, to tell the parliamentarians that, this Pecan and this Nyancom AGM block, I'm calling Nyancom block, they are not that, they are not that rich and all of that. So for that reason, the investor is struggling to raise money because we have too much of it. We having too much of it is a bad idea because they can't raise money if you keep having too much of it. So Parliament, please reduce the amount of stake Ghana has in these fields. And on top of that, reduce the amount of say we have in how they are developed. They said that there were too many approvals that you need from Petroleum Commission. If you want to do this, you have to go to Petroleum Commission. You have to do this, you have to go to Petroleum Commission. Parliament, take all that out so that ECA will have a free hand and then they'll raise money and develop the block. Because the block crown is not that whatever. This was a time when the minister was aggressively making the case that the recovery rate in our fields is 25%. Provable oil reserves in the field is not that huge as we were claiming, etc., etc. That was just 2019 December. Now, in a year and a half, GNPC has suddenly changed its mind, suddenly had an epiphany, and believed that billions of dollars are going to come to Ghana. From where? I've given you the numbers in terms of what are the 2P resources that are most concretely assured. I've given you the likely break-even cost of producing that oil. Well, I've not even brought in the fiscal regime in terms of the taxes they have to pay and the rest of it in order to declare profitability. We have fields that are much cheaper to produce in Ghana, like Jubilee and the rest, compared to this very ultra-deep water environment. Go and read some of the reports that Halliburton made when they were doing wireline logging on that field. Some of the experimental things they had to do in order to meet the requirements that ICA had set. Given all that complexity, it's unlikely that this is more profitable than Jubilee. And we know that operators on Jubilee have struggled when oil prices have gone into a low price environment. So the likelihood that we'll get all that oil makes no sense. Jubilee, when we first started, they said they had 3 billion barrels of contingent resources. Today, we produce about 320 million to 350 million barrels from Jubilee. They are telling us that it's now left about 550 million barrels and the rest. All that talk of 3 billion barrels, 1.8 billion barrels, they are all no longer being heard. So it's very clear that the minister up to a point is right when he says that recovery rate is low. So when we look at those resources that we have estimated, we have to discount them by how much you can actually get out of the ground. So the volumes are under pressure. After we've done all of that, let me land on this point. Yeah. After we've done all of that, we have to look at the cost of production, the profit, and then we have to discount it by looking at the time value of money. When we do those numbers, we don't get the billions of dollars they are talking about. They should publish their model and let's all query it. On top of that, we have fields in this country which are discoveries, like Jata, where they've actually given it back to Ghana. That, we don't want it anymore. You take it. And there's oil there. Good quantities of oil. Wawa, they have discovered oil since 2012. That's Cosmo. They decided not to produce. There are a whole bunch of these opportunities. And we argue that in most cases, those opportunities are superior to this. They make the argument that they cannot be developed as a standalone. In some cases, they are closer to production platforms than now. And if you have a platform sharing model in the country, you can use it. And then last but not the least, if they talk about the fact that they need apprenticeship, we argue that they've set up joint ventures specifically for that, like the GNPC Technic company that is set up in 2012, the move that they are making with Halliburton and the rest. All of those makes it possible to spend far less than $1 billion to get that apprenticeship. Okay. Nobody pays $1 billion for apprenticeship. Yeah, so the value of the transaction is dubious.
All right. So my perhaps final question to you for some 30 minutes input before I go to my other guests on the table is, your case is that unlike what they are telling us, that since taking over the asset, ACA and the AGM have not added a total of 267 million barrels of crude oil to our oil resources in the blocks you are talking about. And
they had a 3-well campaign.
Yes.
And 2 of them were very interesting. 1 of them not that interesting. Of the 2 that were interesting, Southeast and Pecan South, we know the numbers because they have to publicize those numbers for their stakeholders. And nowhere can you justify that those 2 wells have added anything beyond a few millions of barrels to the reserves picture. It's not consistent with what the operator themselves have been saying in different fora. So this notion that somehow they've increased the commercial value of the field dramatically since Hess, it's not true. It's not borne out by the data. On top of that, we know that there's significant risk remaining, which is why even the most optimistic forecast in terms of when you start producing around 2024, thereabouts and the rest, we say they should learn from how ICA itself got into the field. When already there are 7 fields that consecutively had success. That was Hess. Hess still decided to leave, and when they were leaving, they were fine to pay to give it to ACA for $100 million. That should guide them in terms of what the true value of that field is.
Interesting. I don't know who comes in. What do you see? The GNPC and its consultants, advisors, see something that it appears that the civil society within the industry don't see. And they say, look, we are going to deliver Ghana an ambition to own our oil resources. And we see all these figures. How come there is this disconnect between what they see and what the civil society in the area also see and insist?
I would make 5 points.
Okay.
The first one is the presumptions underlying the deal, which civil society is called one either faulty, incoherent, or inconsistent. And the problem is that if you have a deal which you are so convinced would bring this, windfall in terms of revenue down the stream, and that's for which reason we need to contract a loan, not even take existing resources, but get a loan to do this. You need to be able to stress test it, put it out in the public domain, all the underlying assumptions, for people to be able to engage with that data, and let's have a conversation about it, looking at historical information and looking at how market projections will go over a period of time. That part has not been done. And so if you continue to hoard information which you claim to be underlying why you want to do this, and not putting this out in the public domain for real engagement to happen, then obviously people are still going to doubt your motives as to why you're insisting on this, when based on information that everybody else has, we are seeing a different picture. So that's my first call to them. Let's put that information out there. Because so far, the presumptions that we are all getting seem largely incoherent and inconsistent. The second one, obviously tied to this, is definitely questions of process and evaluation that is going on. So I take something from the parliamentary approval that the Joint Committee gave, where it says that don't spend above 1.1 billion. Now, an institution which is decontextualized, doesn't have enough figures, sets a ceiling. On what basis is it doing that? So that's my first question for me is, well,
they have committees.
You have a committee
with members
which is not technically competent.
Who have expertise.
You have a committee which is not technically competent, which is not assisted by experts in any regard, which, as far as I understand, did not receive memorandums in making the determinations that they have done. So on what basis do they set a target and say this is where you shouldn't breach? There has to be a basis for why you make public decisions. And I haven't seen that. The third one is capacity questions. We know that GNPC, well, about $1 billion has been given to it in the past, and its attempts to be an independent operator.
Right.
We haven't seen anything materialize out of that. So capacity questions remain as to your own track record and what you can do based on what you're promising. They can't say, so you haven't delivered in the past. So for which reason which would garner any particular confidence in you being able to perform in the market? And that's one of the things that it's a real concern. Bright talked about certain examples of certain fields which have been abandoned, and whether we can test your feet in the waters by showing us what can be done around those, and which we can do it for a significantly low cost, which we haven't been able to do. So I think that's one of the ways in which we need to be able to get into the conversation. The fourth point is around the investor questions. So there's something Bright said about, wait a couple of years, they're going to leave these fields anyway, and all these valuations will not even matter. And this would be due to a failure, and mechanisms exist within the petroleum agreements where we can get a lot of the fields back if they are not investing a requisite amount over a period of time. So why are we jumping the gun again in that respect? This, for me, comes back to the presumptions underlying it. One of the things I've read is that, well, we know that the market environment around climate change and transition is going to make investments around this area much more difficult. But this also presumes that the costing and what you're going to get in the market for the cost of the barrels produced are also going to reduce over a period of time. So we are going into an area where you already understand that the reason why investors will be withdrawing funding is not necessarily the moral question, but it's also because the limited amount of money that is going to be getting over a period of time. So why are you going where everybody else is withdrawing from? Then finally, listen, public sector workers or persons in general, there's a significant amount of people who are technically competent. There are people who are decidedly incompetent. But what I know and understand is that a lot of actors in our space are not incompetent for no reason. They're motivatedly incompetent. So we have to follow the money. Because I do not see an aggressive attempt to pay some Norwegians or some other people a $1.3 billion without a local incentive in those processes. I haven't seen politicians being willing to give that money away without having certain kickbacks assured for them. The same conversations happen around Vincent Bolloré and the port systems, where there are apparently certain individuals who are getting paid on the side. And so those interests must be investigated. I don't know whether it takes the form of a corruption risk analysis that was done for Ejapa, but this is clearly the new Ejapa that we are dealing with. And I don't know how we get into who is looking to benefit and the profit incentive or the corruption incentives that exist around going into a space where there are clear roadblocks and there are clear signs that there's too much risk for even this to make sense to anybody to whom the thing is painstakingly explained as Bright has done to even a 7-year-old. So those are my sort of comments on this.
We've got some 13 minutes to close the program. Today we did just 25 minutes extra time. We'll take a break and return to have Dr. Eric Odrosai also bring his perspective, but more importantly, he has already raised issues about GNPC's conduct, which it says is positioning itself above parliamentary approval for international transactions, which it cannot do. This is Newsfile is brought to you by Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN, everywhere you go. Ashesi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Son, seeing is believing. Waylead, home is where you start from. Star Assurance, your solid partner. Duraplast, where Duraplast goes, water flows. DBS Industries and MG Auto Trading, official distributors of MG vehicles in Ghana. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and here on Newsfile we put Ghana first. And we have just about some few minutes to go. My guests have been Bright Simmons, Honorary Vice President, Simani Africa, Oliver Barker-Vomawo. He is researcher, University of Cambridge, Faculty of Law. Dr. Eric Odrosai is Director General, Internal Audit Agency. Yes, so let's get your perspective on these developments. From a commonsensical approach and from the information I have received from those behind this thing, it looked so good. It sounded so nice that we're going to spend in total, as had been earmarked, 1.65, billion dollars, and then in return, in taxes only, we're going to get 7+ billion. We're going to get another 27-something billion. That was so good. I felt, Charlie, Ghana is going to take, like they say in Chi, take it better cloth.
Thank you very much, Samson. I see, when it comes to things like these, you interrogate the fundamentals.
Right.
I really do not know the data to which Brad Simmons is speaking to, and then also GNPC has its own data. And I want to believe that there is a need for data synchronization because GNPC is a state institution. They may have some data or information that Bright may not have. Bright may not have something that they may not also have. So I think it's about transparency. It's about carrying Ghanaians along. It's about listening to the other view as well. You may have internal capacity, but he's raised a number of issues, and his understanding is that, look, this is not good for us. And he's even attacked the capacity of the committee that looked at the deal. And that, as my brother here was saying, that he did not think that they benefited from an expert advice. Put all together, I would call on GNPC to at least open up the system, listen to the other side of the divide, listen to Bryce Simmons, and where there is the need for data synchronization, they synchronize the data. But they have one responsibility to Ghanaians, that they should manage this for value for money. They should manage this in a sustainable development manner so that in as much as those of us alive today meet our developmental needs, we lay the foundation for the future generation to meet their developmental needs. And that is ensuring that this particular transaction gives us value for money.
Right. So you go to your next issue about their contractual international...
Yes.
I needed to say that you said they need to open up with these CSOs and the rest of them. They have done an interaction with them, and they have justified every point that they have made to project what they are doing, except that the CSOs supply what in their estimation is superior data and information, including internal incoherence by issues that come out from a partner to all of these things, to suggest that what they are talking about is clearly, it's cutthroat. It's undeserved.
Yes.
They are not deserving.
Samson, you see, we are all Ghanaians, and we have a duty to protect the interests of Ghanaians. If CSOs believe strongly that they have data that can support the work of GNPC, and that GNPC has a data that will not inure to the interest and benefit of Ghanaians, they have every right to go to court to compel GNPC to use the required data in the interest of Ghana. It's very important.
I don't know what sort of suit that will be. I can't contemplate it now, but let's move on to it.
So the next one is the issue the Auditor General raised under paragraph 82 of the audit report. Now he indicated that they didn't secure parliamentary approval as far as about $34 million worth of contracts is concerned to 5 foreign suppliers or contractors. And he indicated that they use single source method for 4 of the transactions, and in 1 instance, they use restricted tendering method. I want to agree with the Auditor General. See, when you look at the Constitution, clearly Article 1815 is clear. And when you look at the GNPC Act, they are a state institution. They are an agent of government. The business they are undertaking are for Ghanaians, and they are expected to comply with the public financial management laws of Ghana. So to that extent, I believe that this international business transactions directly falls under Article 1815, and they ought to have gone to Parliament for an approval. And here, I would want to agree with the Auditor General. The GNPC would just have to do the needful. But the Auditor General also made a recommendation here that they should be sanctioned, the management of GNPC should be sanctioned in accordance with Section 92 of the Public Procurement Act. And Section 92 of the Public Procurement Act is clear that if you breach or you contravene this act, you commit an offense, and the penalty is 2,500 penalty units or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 5 years or to both. So I'm just advising the GNPC management and the dealership to just comply with the law and get either parliamentary approval or the sanctions under Section 92 be invoked in this regard.
Interesting. Right. In 1 minute, what will be your final comment? How do we, because we are not getting any signal that GNPC intends to do, or the state intends to act differently from its initial position.
Okay, I think, but very quickly on this issue of the international business transactions and their approval, I think this is the time for the Attorney General or someone like that to issue an opinion, because when you read those Supreme Court judgments, and as I said, from Balkan Energy, moving on through Faro Atlantic, then Clomega, and then finally Makasibe Yeboah versus the Attorney General, it seems as if public corporations should not get international business transactions unless they can be proved to be an outtake of the government. So I think that matter is a very interesting one, and we need to get some authoritative view on that.
The good news is that we understand the Attorney General Cabinet is almost done with a bill to go to Parliament to do what the Constitution commands, that the modalities for these should be provided. So let's hope that is done and done as quickly as possible. I have some 30 seconds to go.
Yes, I think in respect of the GNPC matter, we really believe that where we have discoveries all over the place that are struggling to get investment, some of them have been relinquished, some of them are closer to production platforms and the right for tie-ins and the likes. They have to justify a portfolio decision to say why along all of these ones we think Nyankon is useful.
All right.
Then for Pecan, as we've said several times, they need to really do the value for money audit with an independent transaction advisor that is not looking at potential possibilities of raising funds for the government for fees, but is focused purely on the value for money audit.
All right.
So not this Bank of America securities thing.
Thank you very much, Bright Simmons. And thank you, Oliver Bakavomawo, Dr. Eric Kodrosai, and Beauty MFA Nate, Executive Secretary, Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. And I want to direct you to Habel's Couture. Habel's Couture. That's where you get the best of African wear. You get kaftans if you're looking for them. You call them on 0200 84 1988. They are at Ajiringano Gates, East Legon. And today I'm not wearing one of that, but you'll see. I'm wearing Said Ali Yaqub 1 year anniversary. He represented commitment to critical journalism, independence of mind and thought, and integrity. And that's why the newsroom at Love FM has been named after him. Have a good afternoon. I'm Samson Ladi Anyanini.
Hello, my name is Nathaniel Atto. You can catch up with all the fun and inspiration on the Joy Sports link here on Joy 99.7 FM, together with all other shows over and over again. It's very simple. All you need to do is go to myjoyonline.com/podcast and relive all of those fun moments over and over again. Joy 99.7 FM, your radio for discerning listeners.
Joy 99.7.